So mac and cheese might be Scrum. It's like we're going to start with the basics.
Yeah.
And now we're going, but we need something more exotic because this is a regulatory situation. So I need more than what the Scrum guide gives me. So I need to look into that pantry and see what do I need to toss into my mac and cheese recipe to make it more robust, more disciplined for my context.
Hi, this is your project management cowboy coming back to you with another podcast. And I'm, as always, I say this at every podcast, that I'm really, really proud of the guests that I have this time. I've got, and they're going to probably think that I'm trying to blow smoke up somewhere, but I'm not. I truly believe what I'm telling you. I have two icons of project management that have condescended to come on the PM Cowboy Podcast. Mark Lyons and Scott Ambler. I'm really, really thrilled that a lot of the people that will be watching this podcast and say, who the heck are those? How are they icons? I don't know them. They are the originators of Disciplined Agile. Now you might say, oh my God, another Agile discipline that I've never heard of. How many more do I need to know? I hope this will be the first and last if you're just getting into Agile. They wrote a great book called Choose Your Wow. Great choice of acronyms there, right? WOW actually stands for Way of Working. And the subtitle is A Disciplined Agile Delivery Handbook for Optimizing Your Way of Working. Now, on this shelf over here, this is a real shelf. I've got one section over here that's for lean and the one above it for Agile. I won't claim that I've read all of them, but I've read a lot of them. I've really had the privilege of being exposed to a lot of these different methodologies and also practice a lot of them. But when I got a hold of this Choose Your Wow, and it was actually recommended to me by a client of mine whose whole organization I trained in project management, he says, you know what, I got certified in Disciplined Agile a while back, and you have to read it if you haven't gone through it. It's brilliant. And that's the first time, it was about 5 years ago that I was exposed to it. And I took a look at it and I started reading through it, and I have to give you guys hats off, Mark and Scott. There were so many things that resonated with me. That you have such a practical, no-nonsense approach to explaining things. I think pragmatism is one of your key principles that you keep underlining, and it's also one of mine. In fact, I would go so far to say that I think a lot of the things I tell clients, I think that I came up with them, but when I review your book, I said, you know how you sometimes when you read a book, you kind of absorb certain things and you think it was your idea and you realize, no, I actually picked it up from somebody. So a lot of the things I've been pushing on to my clients are ideas that came from you. But like I said, Scott Ambler and Mark Lyons, welcome to the PM Cowboy Podcast.
Well, thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. Yeah.
You are coming to us from Canada, so we have a little bit of a time difference. And Mark, you were just saying this is the first time that you and Scott have actually physically been in the same room for a while.
Yeah. It's since we left PMI, it's I guess 3 years ago. It's our first time to meet face to face. So he's here in Toronto. I'm from Calgary. So we're enjoying a mini vacay here in cottage country, just in Toronto.
And you say you have great weather, but you're talking about 20 degrees, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So Celsius, not
Canadian summer.
Yes, yeah.
Excellent.
We've had brutal heat here. It's been mid 30s with the humidex up to 40, high, yeah. Low 40s. And the heat finally broke yesterday. So we're happy.
Guys, like I said, I'm sure there's going to be lots of people tuning in who's, oh my God, Mark and Scott are on a podcast. I have to listen to them. They already know you. But I would say that I'm hoping that I'll be able to kind of bring a new generation of people that are going to be exposed to your great ideas. We have a tradition in the podcast that we want our guests to introduce themselves personally. Kind of tell us, where you're from, what did you study, what are some of the hallmarks of your career, and kind of lead us into what were some of the pain points or some of the things that drove you into the direction of creating this great concept of Disciplined Agile.
Sure. Maybe I'll start. Yeah. So, I started revealing my age here. I started in the mid 80s with a computer science degree, software developer. Back in the Stone Age, to get ahead, you started as a developer, then you became a systems analyst or business analyst, One day you become a project manager. That's how you got promoted. That's how you made more money. Well, I was born to code. I loved coding. And as I went to become a systems analyst, I'm not coding anymore. So I'm a little bit miserable. Then I get into project management and I hate my job, totally miserable. Actually doing real work.
Because you would actually learn something serious, not some of this mumbo jumbo management stuff, right?
Yeah, and back then it was extremely document focused, centric, bureaucratic. I spent my life in meetings, writing up minutes, managing risks. I mean, some of that's kind of fun, but most of it, from my perspective, I wasn't really having much fun. Almost left the industry, and thankfully, a version of Agile was starting to come about, something called the Rational Unified Process. And it was a precursor actually to many of the Agile methods. In fact, many of the
Agile... Yeah, I actually have a client that actually endorsed that methodology for a while.
Yeah, many of what you see in existing prevalent methods nowadays, a lot of the material actually comes from the Rational Unified Process. Yeah. And anyway, so discovered that, then went to work for Rational Software, which was one of the companies to work for back in the days of the dot-coms. And then our company was bought by IBM, and did some consulting before and after those gigs, and got to know Scott, started speaking at the same conferences, and certainly like-minded. And I'm just really flattered and very humbled that Scott actually chose to write the first book with me. I think the combination of Scott's vast knowledge and my sort of in-depth experience in many long engagements using and applying Agile in many different ways, it was a really, really good combination. And it's really good that we came together.
Yeah, definitely. So a similar sort of story. I started in the mid 80s as well. Actually started programming on cards. So, batch programming, and so anyways, all good. And worked in the financial industry in Canada for a while. In software development, got into the data space, did some pretty heavy data stuff back in the day. And then in the 90s, started getting into object orientation. And I had these, wild philosophies that, object orientation was going to take off and Windows was going to take off. And this crazy thing called the internet was starting to become popular. And I'd been on the internet since the 80s when I was in school. So anyway, those were wild philosophies back in the day, and then got into the rep space as well, which is where I met Mark. And I guess at the time you were the online the leader of the Yahoo discussion group, I think it was, or something.
Yeah. That was IBM's advisory group, and known as one of the experts in rep in Canada.
Okay. And so we knew each other and met at conferences and good stuff like that. But then what was interesting was Mark was leaving IBM, and at almost the exact same time I was joining IBM, a few months apart or something. So so he was going to do consulting like I had been doing, and I was going to work for the corporate behemoth that he'd been doing, and in a way to help agilize RUP, but also to work with clients. So then in the late 2000s or the late aughts, I was at IBM leading their IBM Rational's Agile methodology group and Agile consulting effort in a way. And Mark was one of our partners, and so we were working closely and speaking conferences and all. So we decided to write the first book through IBM Press. But then I left IBM. So the book came out, I left IBM, and then we formed a consulting company together, which then eventually evolved into Disciplined Agile Inc. And so we took the Disciplined Agile, at first was Disciplined Agile Delivery, but then it evolved into the Disciplined Agile Toolkit, built the organization. We were out in the field consulting. And I think that's why it was, to your earlier point, why it's so pragmatic and practical. We were sharing ideas that we knew worked, and we were putting things into context as opposed to preaching about, here's our fantasy of how we think the world should work, or here's what worked for us on one project, so therefore it's going to work for you across the board. And that we all know, it depends is the consultant answer for a reason, because it depends. And so the Disciplined Agile toolkit was all about, let's put techniques into context and let's help people pick the right way of working for them in their situation and to evolve it over time, as opposed to thou shalt have a daily stand-up meeting and thou shalt have 3 questions that thou shalt answer, all the stuff that we were seeing in some of the Agile methodologies, which were phenomenally prescriptive. But regardless of the marketing rhetoric, they were phenomenally prescriptive, whereas DA was all about, well, do the right thing in the situation that you face.
Now you're kind of already leading into some of the foundational concepts of a disciplined agile, but we kind of also want to have a little bit of patience for our viewers. If I'm listening to you though, that you guys were involved in agile, like you're like the original gangsters of agile. You guys were using agile because let's be honest. The hype of agile, the word agile, when did that come about? In the early 2000s?
It was 2001, where the Agile Manifesto was written. And I sort of skipped over it, but I developed or led the development of the Agile modeling method, which at the time was answering very serious questions like, how do you model and how do you document in an Agile way? And those were incredibly unpopular topics at the time, but very important. And then moved on to the Agile data method, which addressed the question, well, how do you do data stuff in an Agile manner? Because if that's not Agile, you've got a serious problem. And sure enough, a lot of organizations.
I've still got, I think part of my job is to ask, are you guys familiar with the acronym DAO, D-A-U?
DAU. No.
Oh, I actually know something that you guys don't know. Dumbest assumed user.
Oh, okay.
I am the incarnate DAO. That's kind of my function. A lot of people say, Mark, what are you good for? You don't know how to program. You have no technical degree. You're not an engineer. What good are you as a project manager? And I would say my superpower is asking stupid questions that nobody else dares to ask, which is actually also part of your book. You said that's one of the super skills in there. But let me ask, because listening to you, first thing I hear is that you guys started with Agile long before, almost 15 years before it was hype.
Yeah. If you look at the timeline, a lot of people don't realize that just the Agile Manifesto 2001, Scrum predated, a lot of these methods predated the Agile Manifesto. So Scrum is mid-90s.
Yeah.
And before that was RUP, and RUP talked about building increments of consumable software in iterations, right? So we're well ahead of what.
And you guys refer to, Deming is I think the great grandfather of cyclical or iterative thinking. So I think there was the plan, do, check, act. You guys point out there's the plan, do, survey, act. Then there was the rolling wave, the spiral model.
So there's a lot of history there that often gets brushed under the carpet in the great scheme of various certification schemes. But it's so, and we were there because we were in the field working with customers, helping them build stuff. And trying techniques, right? There was back in the day, there was structured analysis and design and all this very heavy ways of working. And we were trying them out. I was, fair enough, right? I was trying them out, and they just weren't working. Like there was all the predictive methodologies. There's this wonderful spin in theory, and this should work if only the planets were to align, and the planets didn't align. It didn't. But if they had, this would have worked out. And it's like, dude, how many times do you need to fail until you see that you're just throwing money away? And and then that sort of motivated, I think, both of us to get into this lighter weight, more pragmatic way of working. It's like, because we've got to get the job done.
There's so many kernels of wisdom I want to tap into, but I want to get past some of the stupid questions. Have you guys, and I'm assuming yes, but have you guys ever worked predictive?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I actually, right? I don't talk about it much. I wrote 2 books that were the first CMM level 5 compliant software process.
Oh my gosh!
Published outside of the DoD. Yeah.
You don't become a great consultant without making a lot of mistakes along the way. And
Yeah.
any consultant
Are you saying the only way to make mistakes is to work predictive?
no, but I learned a lot about what not to do.
Yeah.
When I was, reading. We used to have methodologies and binders sitting on the shelf, and you would follow templates and steps prescriptively, hoping to get a great result at the end. And you learn that it doesn't usually work.
Yeah.
And same thing with RUP, by the way. Like, we brag about our experience with RUP, but it wasn't perfect either.
Yeah.
It had an amazing focus on architecture and the importance of good architecture and mitigating risk early in the project. But it was overly specific in terms of requirements, detailed use cases and things, which can work. But certainly, if I were to do it again, we would certainly lighten up the way we did requirements. And we did. Yeah. But that's a whole part of the Agile evolution. And by the way, there are still some situations where predictive works. Yeah. There's still some situations where a detailed
absolutely.
use case
I'm a big fan of predictive. I just think it's a like, and you mentioned it, it's one in chapter 1 and chapter 2. It's the context that you have to consider. Let me ask you another question. Since you've been in the business for such a long time, I got involved in the IT game in the 90s and into the 2000s, direction where there were a lot of fusions of big companies and having to integrate their IT systems. And then I went through the Y2K thing for a while. And, let me ask you a question. Back in the day, in the 80s, I mean, IT has always been on the radar for upper management. But if I recall correctly, it used to be, it was kind of a place of awe for management. They were like, we don't know what the heck it is, but we know we need it. And let me ask you a question. Was there a different level of freedom in how you got your work back then? And the second part of the question was, did the MBA, the business approach to wanting to control everything, change that? And is that where a little bit of this over administration through predictive came in? So the first part of my question, in the 80s, did they was way of working, was that just the style?
No, actually, I think no. The reason we needed WOW was because the way it used to be was not about context specific.
So even in the 80s, it was restricted.
Additionally, what's really important to understand is that actually in the early days of IT, it was considered not strategic. It was considered a cost function. And usually the IT department reported up through finance and accounting. It's only after that people really appreciated the true strategic value of IT, and then CIOs became more popular. But no, back in the day, it was very cost focused and prescriptive, and it wasn't fun at all.
Yeah. And it depends, right? Like every organization is different, but certainly in general, like the bigger, the Fortune 500, the government agencies, we're all very prescriptive. And in some ways, and some of them still are, earlier I was talking about the data space, which I'm back to working in again. And in many organizations are still throwing off their old predictive ways of thinking around data because it's been a spectacular failure. If you look at the data quality issues that most organizations face, how they're struggling with AI, often because of data quality issues, they've really got, and some of that's project management problems as well. But there's been, they're still struggling there because there hasn't been enough thought leadership in that space up until maybe the last 5 years has gotten better, but certainly up before then, it's been pretty rough for the data community. And frankly, they didn't have to change. Like that was the biggest problem there, was that nobody, held their feet to the fire really. So they were slow and they ran into some issues. So, but one of the things about DA is that we brought the data stuff in, right? Because we recognize, if you're doing any sort of IT work, data is going to be involved, but it's not the center of it's important, but it's generally not the center of the universe, regardless of what the data people might think. But it's still important. We still need to work together effectively. We need to get the job done, and we need to not make a mess of everything. And to be fair to the data people, they get stuck with these messes that the developers generally create for many reasons, and both business and technical reasons. But so they're gun shy without a doubt. But it's still, at the end of the day, they are still responsible, or they should be responsible, and they should be held responsible. So, so it's getting better out there, but certainly
the reason I asked that question kind of intuitively, I have kind of I have a management background, and I think one of the biggest points of contention in regardless what form of project management you're working on is the sponsor. In German, we call it the Auftraggeber and the Auftragnehmer dilemma, which is the sponsor versus the project manager. And in German, it's very distinct because the word Auftrag means contract. So you have the contract giver and the contract taker. It's kind of like the pitcher and catcher type thing. And there, there's a lot of weight behind it. I think that if this is from my consulting background, my experience is no matter how much classical management sponsors, and most of them have a management background and not always an IT background or a project management background, they love the illusion of a plan. They want to have the scope, time, and cost, and they want to approve it, and they want to have the illusion of a king, where they can say, I can dictate, I put forth, I decree that I allow you to go forth, and this is the time and the money and the work you will do, and if not, I'll chop off your head. Which I think Agile is brilliant at pointing out that's so far away from reality. If you're talking about anything that has a certain level of complexity, that you're shooting yourself in the knee, even attempting it. Let me ask you a question. Somebody who's listening to you guys might say, but these guys, if they've been dealing with Agile back in the 80s, no wonder they're pushing the Agile agenda and not acknowledging that predictive has value, which you're not doing. I know you're not. We'll talk about the hybrid approach in a little bit later on. But you have a great oversight of the evolution of Agile before Agile was even hip, right?
Yeah.
But this is one of the things I love about your book too. You don't hold back when it comes to dishing out some of the challenges that Agile as a hyped movement potentially faces. You care to elaborate where you think the state of Agile is and
Well, I think we could talk for hours on this note, on this thing, but if you go to the Agile conferences, they tend to focus on improving teams. And one of the things that we've always said is, doesn't matter how great your teams are if you're working in a dysfunctional organization.
Yeah.
So you kind of touched on top-down control and such. We found what needs to be successful is you need to make all aspects of the organization agile. That includes things like finance areas, HR areas, and that's built into our framework. You got to fix the organization before you try to optimize teams, or you're just going to be beating your head against a wall.
Yeah. And that's a hard problem. And I think one of the reasons why most of the Agile community, avoided that, because it's a really hard problem and you've got to know your stuff. Whereas just focusing on a team is a heck of a lot easier. And so I can see the attraction of that, but it hasn't worked out well. And frankly, the state of Agile right now is a mess. The big frameworks have crashed and burned. Organizations are not happy. They've made huge investments over the years in certifying their people and training and transformations. Most big organizations have had multiple rounds of Agile transformations, all of which failed. Even the last successful round was questionable at best. But now they're just, they're either lying, or they've given up, or they've lied to themselves just to move on.
Well, they kind of overpromised and under-delivered, which was actually anybody who's dealt with any methodology beforehand. It's kind of a reoccurring pattern. We overpromise and under-deliver.
Yeah, and a lot of it too, like to get back to your earlier points about how people want predictability. They want to know the budget up front. They want to know the schedule up front, and that never works. But they still want something, and so you got to have reasonable stories to tell. But one of the things that we baked right into DA was coherent governance, right? Because you are going to get governed. Like our message was always, you are being governed, like it or not. Like regardless
the sponsor exists no matter how much you redefine your roles. Yeah.
You're being governed, but you deserve to be governed well. And that's typically where governance starts to fall apart for most organizations, right? They've got these governance people that, they're pushing paper and they're holding reviews and they want to see certain artifacts and they want to see all these promised dates and promised numbers. And what do the teams do, right? They fake the numbers. And there's practice, even in like traditional project management, there's practices in order to produce numbers to make it, all the earned value management stuff. The best thing I can say about it is as soon as I hear that you're doing it, I know exactly what your problems are, and so it can help you from there if I can get past the religion, all the religious stuff around that. But they want reporting. Like, you have to be fair, right? They want visibility, and particularly in predictive, predictive is the most offensive word, I think, in the methodology space, because it's not predictable, right? Or if you want to predict, they're going to be late and over budget. Okay, fine, it's very predictable.
I might contend with you what that's concerned, because I'm a big fan of hybrid in reality. I've never done any project where I didn't use agile methodology, but I've never done an agile project where I didn't use predictive. I think it's the paradox of project management, and you refer to it in many of your cultural foundational concepts that you talk about. Is paradox means there's two facts that seem to contradict one another but still coexist. I've used this quote a million times. The classical quote: "Failing to plan equals planning to fail." Right? Everybody loves that one. And then I said there's the great philosopher Mike Tyson, who once said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. Now, a lot of people say, Mike knows what he's talking about, so screw planning. And I'm like, no, you completely missed the point, because Mike spent 4 months in a training camp preparing in great detail on how to fight his match. But he's not so unwise to think that when he goes out there, it's going to happen exactly like he planned. And I think this is where, this is what's confusing. It's not a simple philosophy. And I think that's what's so great about your hybrid approach in your book, is that you address this. We're going to get into what actually, so for the people who are going to ask the silly question, what the heck is discipline? Well, I want to get there, but before we do it, there's two things I wanted to point out. Mark, you alluded to I think if you would translate to one of the things you said, we could go back to the Peter Drucker quote, right? Culture eats process for breakfast, right? And you know what? I don't think we do ourselves enough of a service to really be blunt about the basic flaws of any form of project management. And that is, and you mentioned it, and it kind of reminds me of Six Sigma. Six Sigma had that kind of principle. It's going to cost you at least $1 million to implement. You need to train on all levels of the organization, right? If you don't do horizontally and vertically, you can forget it. And this is what I often say. I wish we would stop BSing ourselves and saying, listen, until the C level, okay, stops using words like agile, inflationary, and get excuse me if I say it, get a hard on over it. Like 100% of the executives I talk to will, if you say, well, how do we do it? They go, we need to do that agilely. And I'm like, that's great. And then if you ask those people who use the word agile, do they know a single agile methodology? Do they know what doing, and we'll talk about the doing versus, because you have a very distinct statement on that. If you don't know how to do it, you can't be it. But doing it doesn't mean you are it. That's kind of another paradox that comes up. And by the way, it's funny that's serendipitous that you use the word religious, because I had a play on words. Your system is called Disciplined Agile, and not too far away from the spelling is disciples. Discipled is another word that you can almost fit in there, because ultimately, any system of working together means that everybody who's on the playing field knows the rules. There's some ground rules that we adhere to, and you can't expect any form of management to work unless it's integrated vertically, and also partly horizontally. So I had to, sorry, you guys got me on my soapbox there, but yeah.
Well, I think what you might be alluding to is the the investment in knowledge. I mean, you talked about team and team training. It's one of the things that made us different, pre-PMI, is that when we went into an organization, we have customers like Papa John's as an example, Panera Bread, that we turned upside down to make them more agile. And one of the first things we said is, we're going to train every team member. And I got pushback on that usually, well, we can't afford that. Can we just train?
They thought you were trying to just milk the cow, right?
Yeah, like, why the entire team? They're busy. Why not just put all the leaders in a room and teach them Scrum, and then that. I said, oh.
But no, leaders only need 15 minutes of training. Middle managers need a day of training. The staff needs 3 days of training. I'm like, screw you. This is,
It's complicated. And that's just the way. That's just we have to admit that. And like the Scrum guide, last time I checked, was 16 pages, 16, right? And if you take out the acknowledgments and the table of contents, it's more like 12. And so how can you possibly understand ways of working with that kind of investment? So no, we teach people what's in the toolkit, which is thousands of practices. Now you don't have to memorize them.
And I've hardly seen a system that goes in such depth as Disciplined Agile.
We teach people where to find answers to their problems. Identify what your goal is. What is your problem? And you can very easily.
We're getting ahead of ourselves, though. Once again, I have to channel the DAOs that are watching. If it's okay, I know you guys are chomping at the bit to talk about your baby, and that's why I'm so happy to have you on board. But let's go to the DAO question that's in the room for some people who are listening and say, well, these guys are kind of engaged, but I have no idea what the hell they're talking about. Please tell us, dumbasses, excuse my language, what the hell is Disciplined Agile? Where does it belong in the scope of Agile? How did you come up with it? What was your idea? Did we need another Agile system?
Yeah. So I'll tell you the origin story so we've turned into a Marvel film now. But so here's the origin story of Spider-Man. Yeah, so we got bitten by a radioactive spider, and then stuff happened. But no, we both put our history with Rob. So what happened? So I joined IBM to help them originally to make Rupp more agile and to work with that team, but also to bring Agile to Rupp to Rational customers. And so when I joined Rational, I was very clear with them. I was not going to develop another methodology. I've been there, done that, had all the arrows in my back, was not interested at all. And they respected that. That was okay. So then, but a year or two in, me and my team working with customers, Mark and other business partners working with customers, and we invariably were being brought into hard situations, right? Like it's always the larger organizations working with IBM who are in really complex situations, who are doing really interesting things, and they were all in trouble. And they were all struggling with Agile because the Agile message wasn't working out for them, and they're all special, and everybody believes they're special, and that's part of the problem too. But and they're not, but they thought they were, but they're not. But they were in different situations, and so very quickly we started. So we're out there doing the work with customers and helping them, but then behind the scenes we're talking and sharing ideas, right? And we came to the conclusion that there was a need for a methodology. Some sort of method framework. But the problem was everybody was doing things differently, regardless of the marketing rhetoric in the Agile community. There was the religious nonsense that they were spewing in order to sell their certifications. But then there's the reality on the ground, right? And we were reality on the ground type people. So it was clear there was a need for methodology. But it was also phenomenally clear and easily observable that everybody was working differently. So and you could choose, and some people don't believe this, there's still religious bigots that still have one answer for everything, right? The one methodology to rule them all. So now we're in Tolkien land. And it simply isn't true. Like you can choose to observe today that a small team works differently than a big team. You can choose to observe that a team that's co-located in a single room works very differently than a team that's spread across the planet. You could choose to observe that a team that is in a non-regulatory, fairly straightforward environment works very differently than a team that's in a life-critical regulatory environment, right? And I can give you, different scenarios, but this is, let alone combinations, combinations thereof, which is what we actually all face. So one methodology, you can't be prescriptive, right? You can't say, thou shalt do it this way and it's all going to work out for you. So we had these two very contradictory observations. There's a need for methodology, but a methodology is not going to work out, right? And I was highly reticent to get into the methodology world again. So that was sort of, the anchor around the neck for a while. But then we came up with the idea as, well, it depends, right? Which I'd like to say that we came up with that really quickly because we're geniuses, but we sort of stumbled into it. But once we realized, because we're consultants, right? So we're constantly spewing it depends, but we didn't really take it to heart. And then DA, or Disciplined Agile delivered at the time, was basically the it depends method, right? So then we started looking, well, what does it depend on? And then you start going down very interesting rabbit holes for a while. And then that's how we put together this idea of a lightweight governance across everything, because you are going to get governed, but helping people make decisions with these.
Well, so you acknowledged organizational situations that you can't change. There's going to be a mandate. There's going to be somebody in charge. There's a money giver. So as much as you want to be, all over the place,
and the money giver, where are you getting your money from? Yeah. Come on. So there's all these agile fantasies of here's the way we want the world to work. And then there was reality on the ground of here's how it actually works. So, the agile guys, they're running around, we don't need to do any upfront planning. We don't need to do any planning. It's like, no, come on. Yeah. And the really sad thing is that because we were at conferences and we'd be going to people's talks and they'd be on stage spewing nonsense. And because they're towing the agile line, right? This is happening all the time. And then we go out drinking with them. We'd ask, so what do you actually do, man? Like, how do you make money? Because there's no way what you just told us this morning works. No way, we don't do that. Go out to damn customers. They're not really agile. And, I've got to, we end up doing, estimates up front. So talk about that, right? Just be honest with what you do. And they weren't.
So there was a period in many organizations, this is still the case, where the PMO gets to decide whether or not teams are allowed to use Agile. And there's actually checklists to say, if you're a small team, co-located, less than 9 people, doing simple stuff, no need for governance, then you can do Agile. And guess what? 90% of the organizations, because of one thing on the checklist, cannot do Agile, so they're sucked into a bureaucratic process. Yeah. What we did is, like, if you're an FDA, if you don't do requirements, then you go to jail, right? So you can't, and it'd be real shame to say that there's no Agile in the FDA. Well, what if we could do requirements, but we can do other stuff in a more agile fashion? Maybe our modeling can be more agile. Context. So be as agile we sort of say, be as agile as you possibly can in the situation that you find yourself in. Even if you can change circumstances so that you can be more agile within the organization, that's even better.
Yeah. I think what you're saying is it's worth its weight in gold. The problem, though, is that it can be misunderstood because there's some paradoxical elements in there. So let me see if I can put this into a concrete example. Many, many years ago, it's already been decades, I had the privilege of being in the periphery of a large, very, very large global organization that for many, many decades had autodidactically, just by the nature of business and there not being a clear mandate on how to do things, people knew that they had to do it some way. So what you had is a grassroots movement over here. In one country, they were doing thing. In one industry, in one business unit, they were doing this. I think the company in total had 15 different types of project management methodologies. Okay. And it was what I call the origin of any of the project management evolution, which is I like to call anarchic agility, doing it every which way. And I think a lot of people who hear way of working might think that's what it is. But let me take you to the crux of my experience there. This companies realized that a very large part of the success of their company was based on their ability to successfully deliver projects, because they delivered complex systems that you couldn't just put in a box and send. They had to be implemented.
Yeah.
You had to engage the client. There had to be training. You had to install hardware and software and stuff like that. So project management became an essential part of their delivery of products. And as a service became a real source of revenue and profit for them. And I was thrilled because it had reached the C-suite level where they finally said, listen, we have 3,642 projects worldwide in 4 different categories. Back then, I think it was 6, A, B, C, D, E, F, something like that. This would be irresponsible from an executive perspective to have that many substantial projects in our project portfolios and us not to do some form of uniformity, common language, common process. Now, a lot of people, and when I originally read Way of Working, that was my first question that popped up reading the book many years ago, was are they saying that everything that we consultants have been preaching over the last decades, hey, we need a common language, we need a common process? Are you contradicting that? I know what you think, but I want to hear it from you, from the horse's mouth or from the 2 cowboys' mouth.
Okay, I'll tell. I like to teach in stories. One of the first real practitioners with DA was Jonathan Smart in the UK, and he at one point in his career was responsible for the worldwide agile transformation for Barclays. Here's a situation where they literally have thousands of teams and projects going on at the same time, and he's supposed to pick a methodology. Like, it's not going to be safe, it's not going to be Scrum, because everybody is doing different things in different contexts, different situations. And by the way, some are more agile than others.
Yeah, under different regulation regimes.
Yeah. So imagine in our world, we'll talk about life cycles in a bit, I'm sure. But we find typically the most advanced teams are the ones that are doing what we call continuous delivery and delivering stuff every day, many times a day. Now, they're advanced teams.
We'll deep dive on that a little bit later.
Yeah, but those are super advanced teams, and there's going to be lots of them at Barclays. So imagine, but John's got to play to the lowest denominator. So he's going to say, okay, our methodology is Scrum, and you're going to build stuff every 2 weeks. So stop delivering every day because our new methodology is Scrum. Well, you would have people quitting, right? So John didn't have the political capital, and it didn't make any sense to have that mandate. So what he said was, we're going to use a DA framework. And I won't go into details because you want to do a dive later, but we have architects on every team, or representatives of architecture on every team.
Yeah.
So what John said is, you do lean, you do Scrum, you do whatever, safe, whatever you think you need to do in your situation. But guess what? We're using the DA framework, and the DA framework says that there will be an architecture owner on every team making good technical decisions and accountable for those technical decisions, so that we have a level of governance and consistency across the organization. So that makes John, CIO, sleep better at night, knowing that there's that minimal governance in place, regardless of what approach that they're using. So
what you're saying is amazing, but it's easy because there's a paradoxical element that some people will hear what you're saying and they say, DA means no system. Let me take a step back. What you're not saying quite honestly, what you're saying to me sounds intelligent. It's just common sense to me. I find it amazing that people have to understand it. But let's get back to the core of my original question was, I've always been a great proponent of common language and common process, but I think common process is often misunderstood, like way of working might be misunderstood. Way of working might mean it doesn't make a difference what I'm doing. I can do whatever the hell I want, and I can use whatever vocabulary, and I can violate any kind of rules because there are no rules. That's not what it's saying. Just like me saying having a common process doesn't mean that you can't have diversity of methodologies to get something done. And I think that might be a good summary of what Disciplined Agile in a very simple way addresses. I often like to say, Scott, you talked about religious war. There's a term I use a lot as well. It gets on my nerves. I like to say, when people say, well, what's your preferred delivery methodology? And I say, whatever works. Yeah. Okay. Whatever works. I mean, if I'm going to work in a larger, if I'm in charge of a PMO, or if I were to be a portfolio manager, I'm still going to create a minimum denominator. We call it minimum viable or whatever, so that we're at least speaking the same language and there's some uniformity, so that, when executives have to read, project summaries, they're not completely confused because it's totally different. And, one person is calling it this, the other person is calling it that. That's not what we're shooting for. But I often say, delivering methodologies are like ice cream. To say that Agile is not project management, although there's elements of Agile that are not project management. We can talk about that later as well. It's ice cream to me, and I love chocolate ice cream. I like vanilla ice cream. Some people prefer certain flavors, but I rarely eat one flavor all by itself, right? And I think that's kind of how, and maybe it's a weird analogy, but I like ice cream, so maybe that's why I threw that in there. It's kind of, I think, what you're going for with a discipline. Isn't it kind of like a core principle of the Disciplined Agile approach to say, listen, it's all ice cream. We can tailor what you're needing. So tailoring is one big foundational concept of what Disciplined Agile is all about, right?
Yeah, and that gets back to like the origin story, right? Like, so it came about from observing that every team was working in different ways. And so how do you deal with that? Because that's not what management wants to hear, right? They don't want to hear that. It's reality on the ground. You can choose to observe it. Most choose not to. And most choose to see it as chaos that they have to get under control by inflicting some onerous governance process. So what we did in DA was we insisted, you know what? Let's make sure you are going to be governed, but let's make sure it's not onerous. Let's make sure that it actually gets the job done. So we adopted a lot of great ideas from RUP and simplified it, but adopted some great RUP ideas and took a risk-based approach to governance as opposed to a documentation-based approach to governance and an artifact-based approach. Now, most governance people their knee-jerk reaction is going to be, well, we're always risk-based, and that's nonsense. I've been into so many organizations where they say, oh yeah, we do risk-based governance, and then you ask, well, how are you doing it? Well, we force them to fill out these templates. Okay, so then you just told me it's artifact-based, but you're lying about the risk-based stuff. And yeah, the artifacts were created based on some sort of risk that happened, years ago. But it's like, no, let's step back from whatever it is you're doing. Let's talk about the risks that you are really interested in, and which we've embedded in DA, and say, so our approach is, we need to see you address these risks appropriately. How you do that is up to you, and here's some really good options. But as long as we see you addressing architectural risk, you're good to go. As long as we see you addressing financial risk, you're good to go, right? And the way you would do that in a regulatory environment is very different than in a non-regulatory environment. Fair enough, right? And what happens in a lot of organizations, they desperately, I've worked in pharmaceutical organizations, right? And they'll say, well, we have to be FDA compliant.
Yeah.
And my answer is, no, you don't. You don't. Some of your projects need to be FDA compliant because there's a risk you might.
Or certain elements of your projects have to be FDA required, but not
exactly. Does your website need to be FDA compliant? Well, no. Well, so do we need to inflict FDA compliancy on the website development team? Well, yes, of course we do, because we've all got to follow the same process. And then, then we're back to, well, wait a minute, And so the challenge with a contextualized risk-based approach to governance, or a non-invasive approach to governance, that's a great term, and that's becoming very popular in the data community lately. But the challenge with that is it requires competence in the part of leadership. And then this is where, and I'm a fairly blunt and harsh guy, and I will make Mark's much nicer than I am, but I will basically, I realize this hard because you need to be competent. So where's the real problem here? And it's the lack of confidence in the governance people that is the real problem here, because they desperately try to fit everybody into one way of being governed, and like the way that you would govern a predictive project is very different than the way that you would govern a continuous delivery product team, right? So the governance people need to be flexible enough to say, oh, that's this kind of team, I will govern it in this way. Oh, that's this type of team, I need to govern it in this sort of way, but still address the same collection of common risks that that organization is interested in. So this is where then now because the governance people or like any sort of organizational support organization like an enterprise architecture team or a PMO or a data management team, they need to be able, because they're working with different types of teams, they need to be flexible enough to work in different types of ways. Otherwise, they are the problem. And inflicting one way of working on all those teams, all that does is it add risk and cost and time into those teams, regardless of whatever your spin is, right? Like, and the government's people aren't evil. They're good people, intelligent people trying to.
They're also products of their context or their function, and it creates a paradigm of how they look at things. Yeah. And they see conformity. They have the classical economic training of economics of scale, and economics of scale is created through uniformity, which is a principle of military efficiency. But we all know that if you have difficult things to do, you don't send out the whole brigade. You send out a special forces team, which is, by the way, I've done 2 podcasts, one with my former lieutenant colonel from the U.S. Army, and one with a captain from the Navy SEALs. And I kind of tried to engage them on this subject matter, that if we're talking about a matrix organization, the line organization is kind of like the big army. It's got rules and discipline and chain of command and shut up and wait. And, it's all about authority. And then you have, for special cases, you have special forces that are allowed to do this to the process, and they might have to salute, but they can be unshaven. They can take the general's car if they need it,
But they're also, so one of the challenges with like the Navy SEALs paradigm is that they're the best of the best of the best of the best, right? They get to train, they get the best equipment, the best training. Yeah. They're the cream of the crop.
Which is a weak analogy for project teams.
Yeah. And they get deployed every so often to do something really nasty. And, whatever it is they're doing is really important and high risk. And
it's carte blanche. They have carte blanche. They can do what they want. Yeah.
Yeah. And they have a huge support organization behind them, right? It's not like we like to talk about, the Navy SEAL Team 5 that, bumped off what was that guy? Doesn't matter. And the 9/11 terrorist guy. But the reality is that, they came off an aircraft carrier with a couple thousand people on it that, the aircraft carrier.
A lot of people are forgetting what the infrastructure has to be for that team to be the heroes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But, they get all the credit. But meanwhile, there's like thousands of people involved in helping them do that, minute and a half job. But how do you make the aircraft carrier work is a more interesting question. How do you make an army of,
from a systems perspective? Yeah.
Millions.
Let me nail down a term that we've used a couple times, which people, because they sound similar, might confuse, but they have very distinct semantic differences. You guys love to use the word prescriptive. The word prescriptive means to tell people how to do something, to create a process, which is a deep part of the culture of a lot of organizations. And then we have descriptive, or predictive is actually the word I'm thinking of. Predictive, which is a term which is also called the classical or waterfall. It's not the same thing. Those are two different concepts, just to create clarity there. And a while back, I had America Pinto in one of my podcasts, who's the new cheerleader for PMOs at PMI. Had his own organization that was swallowed by PMI, similar to your story, which we'll talk about a little bit later as well. And he had a great analogy, which I liked, when it came, because he has a similar approach to PMOs. He said the big problem with PMOs is this prescriptive approach that there's one size that fits all. And that's far from reality. There's different hierarchical PMOs, there's different functional PMOs, there's different styles, there's different flavors. And he loves to use the word prescription when it comes to medicine. He says, depending on your ailment, you need a different prescription. It's a prescription that you might have to follow to a certain extent, right? But not every patient is going to get the same prescription. Would you kind of say that that's an analogy that fits for your situation as well?
Yeah. Well, in a way.
Yeah. The problem I have with it is it means there's a top-down directive from somebody to say, this is your prescription. This is the way you're going to do things. Where
Yeah, it would sound like that, but America actually means it. America is very, very, very fluid with his concept of bottom up and top down. I think a lot of people don't realize how much of the success of an organization is determined bottom up. Yeah. In those gray zones where there's no rules and no prescriptions, how the line makes find solution to things, their own solution. And this is just a form of way of working. I also wanted to kind of underline again what I love about your guys' message is that say to get away from this concept of prescriptive approach. This is dogma and this is the way you're going to do it. One of the things I realized many years ago is that no matter how many books you read, how much training you get, how many certifications you add to the end of your name until you don't even see your name anymore, none of that replaces intelligent application.
No, you got to know what you're doing. Yeah,
you can be a master of tools. But if you don't know when to use the tool or how to use the tool in a different context or how to reach out or how to, work psychology when psychology is the key issue. And I think a lot of people who get certifications say, you know what, if I get one more certification and then I'm good. I'm made whole. And I'm like, no.
Yeah. Get you the next job.
Another can of worms.
Yeah.
So people often ask us, if you're not going to ask us, if it's so great, why isn't everybody doing it?
Yeah.
And, pre-PMI, during PMI, we struggled with the marketing because when you tell people there's 2,000 practices in there, they're like, oh my God, I can't possibly learn that. I'd much rather use the 17-page Scrum guide. Thank you very much. And by the way, it gives me freedom to fail. I can fail fast and not get punished. So
I can fail hidden.
No accountability. That sounds like, much more interesting than Disciplined Agile with governance and all that crazy stuff. We're making it sound more complicated and harder than it really is. Yes, you should have minimal yet sufficient governance, which often in many cases very little governance, depending on the situation. Yeah. But it's not hard to use. What I think we failed to point out is that it's a reference toolkit. It's a reference library. It's not a playbook. It's not you have to do 2,000 things. It's, oh, gee, I'm struggling with requirements. Stories ain't doing it. My users really aren't articulating what they want properly in stories. We build to the story, we test to the story, yet they're still unhappy. I'm missing something. So a coach, a team lead, scrum master, whatever, says, let's look at the toolkit, see what it has to say. Opens up, explore scope. And in there, I find 15 different ways to do requirements. Some pictorial, visual, diagrams, some textual. I'll pick one of these and one of those. Let's try a sprint, see if that improves the communication with our business. Oh, and then, by the way, put the toolkit, it's not don't use a book anymore, use the internet, but anecdotally put it back on the shelf and get back to work. That's how hard.
You're jumping ahead, but I'm letting you go because I'm with you. I'm not an expert in it. I've had an insight into it. And also, when I was talking to Joshua, my head was spinning when he was showing me all the mind maps, and I'm like, oh my God. I mean, my first impression was, a lot of it when my eyes zoned in and I read the tools, I could recognize, I'd probably say like 60-70% of the methodology. So it was, I was kind of like intuitively putting it together. But my degree is originally in product management and in marketing. And the first thing I said, I'm an old academic geek. So I'm one of those, I love to read books and I love to learn as much, across the board. But from one thing that was kind of prevalent in my mind when I was listening to him, I said, if I was the marketing manager for this product, I was trying to break, how would I market this? Because quite honestly, I think what Agile does at a junior level and Disciplined Agile does at a high, PhD or master's level is acknowledge the fact that if you're talking about solving problems that are complex, there's a lot of bells and whistles that you have to be familiar with. You have to be able, and it's difficult to crunch it. And you know what? It's not something that I can do in the elevator with an elevator pitch. I mean, I might get your attention, but you're not going to understand. And I think this is what you were addressing, Mark. And I would agree with you. I think that's one of the challenges, because I think a lot of managers, senior managers, are intimidated with the details, and they just kind of want a quick fix. They, if you can, if it sounds good, the kind of this con man thing, which unfortunately is very in vogue at the moment. If you can tell BS, then you can. It's easier to get people's attention than if you tell them the truth.
Yeah, I just want to point out, you really touched on something there. It's management's lack of trust. So our message is, let the teams make choices. They're smart people. Give them a menu. We say, this works in this situation, this works in other situations. We actually help them make your decisions, better outcomes. Yeah. But it boils down to management's trust that they're going to make good choices based on that. Compare that to, let's say, SAFe, where you will do exactly what this framework says. Yeah. That works well for managers. Okay, put my people in a box, follow the recipe, and we'll be successful. I'll get promoted and make my bonus. So that's kind of fundamental. Is a lot of managers. John Smart at Barclays trusted the teams because he didn't know.
We're kind of dancing around another paradox, which I feel is really important to mention if you really want to have a more advanced understanding of the challenges we face. I think a lot of people on a superficial level believe that agile means I need less detail. Yeah. Right? They think, I don't need documentation. It's quick. It's all quick and dirty. And I always tell my clients is that they want to work agile. I said, are you conscious of the fact that agile is actually more work? It's actually I think the biggest flaw of predictive project management is this superficial illusion on a C-suite level that I can write a project charter and maybe a scope statement, and then I have the illusion of granularity, and you have a work breakdown structure that goes down to a work package, which is the equivalent of a feature or an epic. I'm like, what crack pipe are you smoking? Because it's in the details where the complexity lies, and this is another paradox. I think I don't know. Maybe if agile is a little bit the victim of its own marketing. Actually, agile is an absolute advocate of detail, much more than predictive is. I mean, the whole concept of requirements. You guys mentioned that one key element of your DAD is design thinking, right? What is design thinking? It's more than just requirements engineering, but the original focus was, hey, we need to do requirements engineering, and the best way to do that is to include the people who want it, right? If I'm going to make a quick summary.
And I think one of the so we would run into leadership that believes in this predictive approach and all this detailed upfront planning, and the first question out of my mouth is always, really, and how well has that worked for you in the past? Because the weird thing is,
because I said it works good.
Yeah, well, and, if they're fresh out of mid-20s, fresh out of school, okay, fine, fantasy world. But come on, if they've been around the block a few times and they still believe this stuff, give me a break, right? And the weird thing is, as soon as I ask that question, I only get bad news. They start bitching about it, or I get one of two things: instantaneously I get bad news because now suddenly we're talking about reality. Or I get yet another level of lying, which I then question again. Really, and you thought that was on time? How did you make it on time? Oh, well, we had to cut 3/4 of our scope. Okay, so that wasn't on time. You only got 1/4 of what you were promised, and you had to do 2 other projects after that to get the rest. Yeah. That's clearly not on time. Come on. And then you can start saying, well, wait a minute. So you've never actually seen this work. Why are you still on this treadmill? Because gut feel tells me it's not going to work for you again because nothing's changed here. Oh, well, it'll work this time because all the planets will align. Come on, right? But then they got to go at risk and what they believe to be at risk and start doing the right thing. But the problem is one of extremes, right? Like a very common cultural problem in IT is all this black and white thinking, right? It's very heavily prescriptive or it's total chaos, free for all. And Agile align themselves with, like, unfortunately, in many ways, align themselves with the chaotic free for all, which is not what the original intent was. But so DA, we said, well, wait a minute, no, we want to make better decisions, and unfortunately, the problem becomes one of that means you need to be skilled and experienced enough to make decisions, or to know you need to make decisions, and then to make them, and so you can't just hand a cookbook. So a great metaphor Mark came up with was years ago was one of cooking, right? So you don't just hand somebody a cookbook and say, go and make some, a 5-course meal for the family, and they've never cooked before, right? It's their host, because the Joy of Cooking is a great book, but if you don't know some of the basics of how to cook, if you don't have basic cooking skills, it's going to be hopeless. And so what do? When you cook a meal, you go to your cabinet, you pick ingredients, and you make the meal that's appropriate for your family that night. Tomorrow, I'm in the same kitchen, using the same tools, same basic ingredients, making a completely different meal, because I can't serve steak and potatoes every single night. My family's going to rebel, right? Once in a while, great, but next night's going to be chicken, and next night's maybe vegetarian or something. But it's not going to be the same thing over and over and over again. And it's the same thing at the project level. It can't be the same thing over and over again, because we don't face the same problems. Unless you're a consulting firm that all you do is install package X at clients, you're never going to face it. And even if that's true, every client is different anyways, right? So you never get this purely predictable, purely prescriptive thing. We're always in bespoke land. And this is
I think it's, I think the easiest way to understand it is to ask yourself how much of it is bespoke and how much of it is standard. I have one particular client that it works in IT, and they're a very reputable company. So, and all their clients expect them to work agile, but in reality, their deliveries are very predictive. They've been doing it, thousands of times. It's I would say a lot of their projects, you could probably map out the roadmap maybe 70%, and the rest would have to be adapted to the context, right? And I think that's also kind of one of the things you're talking about in your hybrid approach is, and I would say, listen, it's always the question of how much is known, how much is the known unknown, and how much of it is the unknown unknown, and based on that, that's your percentage of hybrid. Is the 80% agile and 20%? Maybe that's too simple in the way I'm putting it, but I think you get the gist of what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
And so one of the things we did in DA, we had explicit phases, which is a swear word for most agilists, right? And then you see this thrashing in the agile world, where they still argue, is there really a sprint zero or not? Well, sprint zero was a phase, is your project initiation phase.
I like sprint zeros.
Yeah, because you got to carry it. Like, you don't just beam down from the Starship Enterprise and get going. Right? Somebody's got to put the team together. Somebody's got to get some initial funding. You got to do some initial requirements. You got to
do some team building.
Yeah, you got to get going in the right direction, right? So let's be good at that. Let's not just start going. Let's do a little bit of thinking up front and get going in the right direction, and dramatically reduce the risk of the project. Or the product team, is the case may be, right? And let's make it explicit. Let's get good at that, right? Because if you're not good at it, you're going to make mistakes. And I think a lot of the reason why the Agile communities got into trouble was they believed their own rhetoric. Like earlier we're talking about failing fast, and there's some good things about failing fast. It's certainly better than failing slowly, but it's still failing. And why would you run it? And so you get these people who are on stage and they're shooting their mouths off about, we run experiments and we experiment with a technique and we fail fast. And we say, what a spectacularly stupid thing to do. Like, if you have no clue what you're doing, then yeah, that's pretty good. But if you know what you're doing, it's like, well, wait a minute. I don't need to, like, let's juggle chainsaws, right? That's not a good idea. You can experiment with that and you're going to fail fast, I guarantee it. But you're going to fail. You don't really need to fail with I can tell, it's pretty obvious that juggling chainsaws.
And you guys talk about that. It would slip past the unobservant reader, but you actually talk about, that's one of the paradoxes, that you have to be open and flexible. But on the other hand, you don't, there's some legitimate experience is legitimate, right? I think the Bismarck's quote, there's a Bismarck quote that said, smart people learn from their own mistakes. Really intelligent people learn from others, right?
Yeah. And
you don't have to make every damn mistake that everybody before you has made. All right, it would be highly inefficient. You kind of mentioned the rhetoric that kind of sometimes gets in the way of agile thinking, and you have one of my favorite ones, which used to drive me. It was an absolute trigger quote, which was the old classic one. It's more important to be agile than to do agile. You want to give us a quick rundown on how you feel about that one?
Yeah, I mean, we've been going to Agile conferences for literally decades. And one of the frustrating parts for us is that there's a lot of touchy-feely, huggy sessions about if we could just all get along better as a team, we're going to have awesome results. So that's the kumbaya, hold hands. And we're going to be wonderful. Well, at some point, like Scott likes to say, you can be agile all you want, but at some point you got to do it.
Yeah, you got to do the job.
And if
you're a marathon runner when you run kilometers, not when you buy the watch or the shoes or put on the little nifty shorts.
So, I get a kick. So you learn how to do great retrospectives where everybody's sharing what we did wrong and then how we're going to get better. And it's
KISS. Keep, increase, stop, start. I remember that.
Yeah, but I paint a picture of a bunch of people who haven't invested time in learning ways of working beyond the 16-page Scrum guide. And all you've ever been taught is user stories. And you put those people in a room for sprint 97, because they've had 96 of these meetings, you're still not getting any better. Everybody's looking at each other saying, I don't know, we're getting along great. We're not fighting. I don't know why we're not, doing great agile. Well, maybe they need to open their eyes to new techniques, right? This is where, if a Scrum Master understands 70 different ways of doing requirements, they can bring another one to light. And by the way,
if most organizations would just have a Scrum Master, that might even help.
Yeah, and that Scrum Master who has to have a clue. Otherwise, you're not going to get any. By the way, and the Agile people don't want the Scrum Master giving out answers. No, he has to figure it out for themselves. Well,
that's just stupid.
If they're ignorant about working, they're not gonna figure it out. Yeah. It's no wonder that they struggle. So I said before, better decisions lead to better results. If you know what the ingredients are in the pantry, like you used to do mac and cheese, so you knew 4 or 5 ingredients. Try to make an exotic dish, right? You have no clue. You look in the pantry, you have no idea what saffron is. So teach people what's in the toolkit. Help them to find answers to the situation, increase the amount of ingredients, and they'll be able to graduate beyond basic mac and cheese to building something that's more palatable to their users.
And so we would, we would be teaching Disciplined Agile courses, right? So you'd go into a customer, and we'd be in there teaching a team, and invariably, half the workshops you'd end up with the Scrum Master, and and they knew everything. And they'd be sitting in the back of the room like this, right? And they introduce themselves, I'm John, the Scrum Master. I know everything, and I'm being forced to be here. And sometimes they come out and say it. Sometimes you could just tell by their attitude that they know everything, and that's okay, whatever. But invariably, what would happen, and almost always by the end of the first day, they would come up to us and they'd say, and they'd apologize, and they say, you know what? I thought you guys were wasting wasting my time. And here we are in the first day of the 2 or 3 day workshop, is whatever the situation was, and not only have you given us answers for 3 or 4 really hard problems that we've been struggling with for months, you gave us several options for each one, and so it blew their minds, and they've been trying to figure it out, because the Scrum community, there's just certain things they don't want to talk about, and so they've got these huge blind spots. And so, yeah, if you rely on just that narrow band of group of people, you're really hosed. And this happened in organization after organization after organization.
Yep.
And then we'd say, yeah, so, and you might want to hear, like, wait till tomorrow when we get into some of those swear words like governance and data and other things that I guarantee you're also struggling with. Or finance.
Part of the problem is Scrum Master education and certification. You know, I mean, the first one I went through, I can't stop telling the story. Great trainer, bit a little pompous sometimes, but a good trainer. Had written a book. We got lots of giveaways. 2 days, 30 people in the class, and I've told the story 100 times, but I can't because it's just it sticks with me. But at the end of the course, I was like, of the 30 people who are in this course, 2 people are actually going to be able to Scrum afterwards, and I was one of them. And which is funny because I'm one of those cantankerous, constructive, critical people who, says, why do I have to use a story point if the situation, if culturally the team is better with effort and duration? Oh my God, that's sacrilege. I'm like, it's not a religious war, But
you had some
of the 30 people,
28,
they kind of, they had fun for 2 days and they got a certification, but they would never. They're going to fail on the first thing, which is a story point, And they
had a great time playing games, right?
Yeah,
they felt good about themselves, like this. So and this was setting the culture in the Agile community. It's not about getting the job done; it's about feeling good about yourself, right? And Mark was saying, we'd have be kumbaya, and we'd have big group hugs and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, you feel good about failing. I don't want you to feel good about failing. I want you to feel good about delivering real value to your customers, and not just spinning that, but actually delivering and actually having metrics that show that they're happy, right? So it's not just so the Scrum guys like to talk about potentially shippable software. That's not what we're aiming for, right? We really need like consumable solutions that are being used. And that people enjoy and are delighted by. It's not just, we made our date, here's a bunch of crap, right? It's like, no, if you're not using it, you've still failed, right? If they're not happy with it, you've still failed. And there's more to it than just.
I told you guys off camera, but I'm going to tell it again on camera because it fits in the situation. I think it's going to also provide a little bit of a segue. I think one of the times where my consciousness really was triggered, and I realized that you guys and Disciplined Agile was really something to look at. Besides, kind of reviewing it, and I had critical conversations with. I think I had like debates with myself and some of the things you wrote here. I was like, doing devil's advocate. What the heck? How can they write that? This is bullshit. And then I would think about it, and I said, well, if you look at it from this perspective, it makes sense. But one of the things that gave me an indication that you guys were really onto something was. The people that I know that are certified according to Disciplined Agile, okay? I know people who have 30 years plus project management experience who are really senior. They're at least on my level or even above my level, and they were going out and getting your certification. And that's the first time I was like, hey, it was kind of a very elite group of people who were really drifting towards Disciplined Agile, and that was kind of the proof is in the pudding. I guess it's one of the KPIs you can say that you were onto something. I want to kind of use what you said beforehand as a segue. I love the conversation so far. One of my missions for the podcast is to kind of also create a storyline that people can follow that's easy to follow as they move forward. I still want people. I think we have to flesh out the Disciplined Agile a little bit. I don't think we have to go through the manifesto and the principles. People can read that themselves. There's some kernels, some big kernels of wisdom in there. But let's kind of see if we can maybe look at a little bit more of the framework, and then maybe talk about where I want to go to is if we can pique people's interest. One of the big questions I want to deep dive on a little bit with you is, okay, maybe I don't understand, but you have my attention, you have my interest. I've made a decision. I want to take a look at discipline. That we kind of look at, well, what would be the steps? How would an organization? What would be the 3, 4, 5 steps on how to move into the disciplined agile direction. But before that, maybe we can flesh it out a little bit so people can grasp it, make it a little bit more tangible. One of the things you have in your DAD, in your disciplined agile development thing is the life cycle concept. Okay. And when I first read the life cycle, I was like, oh, this is where the initiation, plan, execution, monitor, control, and closing comes in. But no, that's not what it is. This is your life cycle concept addresses the different flavors of ice cream. I don't know if the analogy is correct, right? And just for summary, and there's some nuances in here as well, right? So the first one I have is agile, and there's many flavors of agile. Then you have agile continuous delivery, which I think is there's a hidden message in there that I'd love to hear. Then you have lean, and when you guys said lean, I was like, oh, now they've got me. I've got a whole section over here in lean. I think that lean, that's one of the absolute development areas that a lot of companies need to include in their value delivery for project. It's just it's a really important process there should be some integration there. Then you have continuous lean delivery. Then you have exploratory, and you have program, which piqued my interest. Okay. First time I read it, I was like, where the hell is waterfall?
And I was missing, to be fair.
Could you just for those of us who are not familiar with Disciplined Agile, maybe kind of explain what was the driving idea behind the life cycle, and how do we need to understand, even if we don't have time to deep dive on each one of them?
Let me start, and then you can explain the difference between the 6.
Yeah.
So first of all, if you say DAD is 2,000 practices, you're like, what the hell? Where do I start? Well, you start with the life cycle. You start with.
Now you've mentioned this, and I've let you slide on this. Sorry to interrupt you, Mark. When you mention 2,000 practices, that scares the hell out of people who don't know what. So what you're saying is, we're talking about the tip of the pyramid, right? We're talking about six life cycles. But when you break those down, you're eventually going to get to the bottom of the pyramid.
Well, just think about it. The cooking analogy is a good one, because you don't say, what am I going to have for dinner? Well, you could go into the pantry and say, what have I got and what can I make from it? But that's kind of like reverse engineering. You probably more say, like, I like pasta. I want some pasta today, but I'm sick of mac and cheese. So mac and cheese might be Scrum. It's like, we're going to start with the basics.
Yeah.
And now we're going, but we need something more exotic, because this is a regulatory situation. So I need more than what the Scrum guy gives me. So I need to look into that pantry and see, what do I need to toss into my mac and cheese recipe to make it more robust, more disciplined for my context. So and depending on your maturity, if you're brand new to Agile, you might start with a Scrum thing, and Scott's going to explain what we have for that. Or if you're more advanced, you might be doing lean. You might have leaned up the process, and you have technical capability for software development to spin stuff out on a regular basis. So depending on where you are in the capability maturity spectrum, and what you're comfortable with, and whether it's Scott will talk about project versus product approach, you're going to pick one of these starter recipes. That's what the life cycles are. And then you'll sprinkle in ingredients from the toolkit to customize it for your context. So
now,
the difference
are these life cycles mutually exclusive, or do they overlap too?
They overlap from a governance point of view. They also overlap from a transformation point of view. Okay. So you might start with like the Agile project life cycle because you believe it's a project. You believe you're Agile. You believe it's a project. Okay. But then over time, say you're actually following Scrum, right? Let's actually take them at their word for once. And if you're actually following Scrum, 6 months later, you better not. I don't want to see you following Scrum anymore, because you should have been improving. So you should have improved away from Scrum, right? More than likely into some sort of lean continuous delivery.
The Spotify way is no longer the Spotify way.
Exactly.
Scott, you should just mention the Agile different. It's like Scrum. It has sprints or iterations.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing you need to know about the Agile life cycle. It's time boxes of increments of
short increment. Yeah, sure.
Whereas lean is not. So go ahead.
Yeah. And so we distinguish between project and not project. So we have like the Agile project life cycle versus the Agile continuous delivery life cycle. So the Agile continuous delivery life cycle, you're and that's probably closer to pure Scrum in a way, but you're delivering maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks, and you've got something that's ready to go into production, and you more than likely deliver into production, right? And I've seen data warehousing teams do this, and frankly, that's one of my favorite ways of working, is having a 1 week sprint or 1 week iteration where at the, every week you deliver new stuff into production for a data warehousing team. Yeah. Although I also do continuous data warehousing.
So do you understand the distinction? So the agile lifecycle, you might go through 5 or 6 or 8 sprints before you have something, because you need to do end of lifecycle testing.
So I think that agile is not uniform on its language, but there's the word iteration, which is sometimes used. Then you have the word sprint, and then you have the word release. And depending on what you're limited, or I have an interpretive understanding. For me, a sprint is 1 week, 2 weeks. If you want to really piss me off, maybe more than 4 weeks. But I think one of the big challenges with the sprint, I think what a sprint tries to do is something different than what a release intends. And that's why I use both terminologies. For me, a release is I'm delivering something that I can, a prototype or a partial product that I can actually have validated. But I use sprint as a tempo mechanism to make sure that I'm interacting with my team, that we're getting feedback, that we're making forward progress. But it might be 2 or 3 sprints before I have a release. So I separate the two.
Yeah. You built something, you can test it, you can demo it, but you need to do 3 more of these before you have a minimal viable product. And so that's the agile based on Scrum, deploy after a number of iterations or sprints. The continuous delivery one, what Scott is saying is that at every single sprint boundary, ship.
Oh, wow. Okay. I that slipped me by, because what I thought that you meant with, and I think you partly do, because this is also an element which when I read it, I had to sit back and I took a deep breath and I really had to digest it. But I thought it was brilliant. Like I said, I have originally a product management background, right? And for me, I still remember my college years. I learned the classical Booz Allen Hamilton, the product life cycle, and the names have changed. But back when I'm an old fart, so we had the old question mark, shooting star, cash cow, and then poor dog cycle. Now it has fancier names. But I when I first got formally involved with project management, I realized that project management is actually a part of that bigger picture. That's where the matrix of the matrix organization comes together. Project management is like, I sometimes use the analogy of a space shuttle. The greatest amount of risk and energy that's put into a space shuttle is during launch, right? And then it kind of, throws off the boosters and it kind of evens out as kind of the shooting star phase. And then, it gets up in the stratosphere and is going in the right direction. But one of the things that I remember reading in your book was the brilliant concept, and I think Kanban is kind of the door to this. Kanban was originally, correct me if I'm wrong, was not originally a project management approach. It was something that came from production, And like everything in project management, we beg and borrow and steal from everywhere, which is okay, right? But what you kind of went back to the origin, and one of the things that you say in your book, if you are working on a product and you've put together a great team, and you've evolved into a semi-stable process of working, way of working, right? Maybe you'll review it and you'll perfect it as you move forward. Why on earth would you disband a team? Because isn't the end of your project the beginning of the next project? And
it is. And it's not really.
Let me tell you something. That was such a violation of dogmatic project management thinking that has swallowed the hook, line, and sinker this concept. A project must have a beginning and an end. And I'm like, that's an artificial barrier. What's much more relevant is what happens before a project, or just as relevant is what happens before a project and after a project. And if you can't appreciate that and integrate that small segment of a project into the big picture, then you're missing out on the big picture, right?
Yeah, and that's the difference between like product thinking and project thinking. Yeah. And I'll throw this hand grenade out, then I'll move on for a while.
Please do.
So I think the biggest challenges that PMO face right now in practice is the word project. Yeah. So if I hear a PMO and it's still calling itself a PMO, that to me is a symptom that they fundamentally don't know what they're doing.
What would you like them to call themselves?
I would rather call them either a value management office, or better yet, a value delivery office.
I have a problem with the VDO.
Okay. Why?
It sounds like a venereal disease.
Oh, well, okay, fair enough. Yeah. I don't travel in the same crowd that you do, so I would take, but anyways.
No, okay,
yeah,
that's an interesting point.
Yeah, because it's not just about, like, projects are important without a doubt, but it's not just about projects. You have long-running products, you have service teams in your organization,
often hidden in programs.
Often hidden in programs. Yeah. Well, there's so you can distinguish between projects and programs and products and service teams. So if you want to be effective, so say you're a PMO leader and you actually want to, be successful in your career, and you want to be, you want to have a seat at the big boy table, or the big adult table. It's got to be about more than just projects, and because a lot of the value delivery is in not projects. And this is true. Like, we spin a good story about delivering value, but we actually deliver potential value. So if you look in DA, if you look at the value management life cycle, coming out of delivery is potential value, and we specifically did that. And this is some of the great insights of Al Shalloway. We deliver potential value, and it's not until things are in the hands of our customers or our end users that we're delivering real value. And this is true, like, it's certainly true in the software world, but it's also true in the physical world, right? So if somebody so say you've got a physical construction company and they build office towers. Well, there's no value being, you're delivering an office tower and you could sell it. So there's some value there. But the real value is in the occupancy of the tower and in the revenue generation, or the rent generation, or whatever, of that ongoing operation of the office. I think
the term that used to be used was where value is not direct. It's called synergistic, was a term that was played with for a while, but I haven't heard that term in a long.
And it's the overall life cycle of what it is that you're doing, right? So this is the fundamental mismatch that project management had in the software world, was that software in general are long-running assets and should be treated as such. It should be financed that way. It should be
I love that concept. I think the closing of software, because then you always have that. A lot of companies have this. Well, what about service and maintenance? Some companies make it part of the project, and like classical project managers find that offensive. Where I'm like, yeah, but that's where you make the value.
Really no longer part of the project. So this, I think, is the mismatch, right? So in particularly, if you take a look at, if you consider projects having a start and an end, which is the classical definition, then maybe like for that office tower, there was the construction project, more like a construction program. But anyways, we'll call it a big project, and it ended, right? Because we cut the ribbon on and the project manager, the construction project manager, goes away. But the reality is that building might be around for centuries and has to be managed and all that good stuff. So the life cycle of the asset that you've created goes beyond it. It started earlier than the construction project. It goes beyond the construction project. So you want to look at it, the overall picture, right? And so this is why, like, the value management office or value delivery office concept is really far more effective and realistic than the PMO concept. We really need to move beyond it. Like, and don't get me wrong, projects are still important. They're going to be around, but they're not the only game in town.
Yeah,
and it's not like everything is not a
project. You can't get hung up on your own supply. Yeah.
And
Mark,
it's not a project economy.
Were you chomping at the bit to add something?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Because we've got 6 life cycles and we haven't gotten through them yet, but some of them are more oriented to project approaches, and some of them are more oriented to product approaches. So,
and that's good.
So why do we have, and some are better than others. So if some are better than others, why do we have them all? Well, because situation, context, and sometimes organizations frankly just aren't ready for the program.
So maturity, capability.
Yeah. So you've got a place to start. You can start with the Agile, treat it as a project. Maybe the first time you build a mobile app, right? You treat it as a project. You got a startup phase, and you do some planning and budgeting and all that stuff. You go through a bunch of sprints because you don't have a minimal viable product. And then you finally do have a viable product and you deploy it. And then, okay, great. Now what are we going to do? We're going to shut it down? No, there's going to be a next release, because you're never going to get all the features.
And next.
So what do? Well, maybe we roll out to continuous delivery because we have a viable product out there. And now we'll add a feature and we'll now deliver it every sprint. like bing, 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 new feature every 2 weeks, right? So they've evolved from one life cycle to another. Then as they start to get their chops together and they say, why are we having, 95 retrospectives over a couple of years? Why don't we just improve process every day and not have a special ceremony and waste people's time? And why do we have to batch stuff up for every 2 weeks? Because we're really good technically. If I build a feature today, let's release it today. And tomorrow, if I have another one, I release it tomorrow. Now you just evolved to a lean, maybe a continuous delivery approach. Do we see this? This is based on our history, Mark, is that every time we go into an organization, they start at a low capability and maturity, and they start with basic Scrum or what we call Agile. And as they get better and they improve their technical practices, eventually we get them to a lean continuous delivery. Yeah. And they are the most outstanding teams that we see out there, but they don't get there day one. It's a multi-year process.
Yeah. And we see this over and over and over again. So if the teams that are really, like I said earlier, if the teams are really doing Scrum, I would expect them to be no longer doing Scrum 6 months later, right? But you'd have to get the Scrum tickets out of the way to allow that to happen, right? You've got to allow the team to actually improve exactly as Scrum, likes to preach, and allow them to, start shortening the sprints and get to the point. Like, for example, once you get to the point where you're delivering once, you're doing a continuous delivery Agile and you're delivering once a week, going to delivering daily or multiple times a day is a no-brainer, right? Because you've automated, there'll be one or two more things you need to automate.
You're skating on thin ice now, Scott. I have this ongoing conversation with clients right now. I want to be quite honest with you. Most clients I know, you're lucky if you can get them to commit to a 4-week sprint.
Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy.
Yeah.
Here's my card.
You need better teams. But no,
the system. Let's endorse a system which is based on value flow, on value chain, right? And then screw it and said, hey, well, whatever, we'll do it. And I know companies who say, no, our sprints are 6 weeks. Hey, I'm getting a heart attack every time. I'm like, you guys haven't understood the principle of a sprint.
Yeah.
You know the problem with talking with you guys is it's really, even as a moderator listening, it's hard for me there's so many kernels out there and so many paths we can go on, but I want to there's one question that keeps popping up and slipping by, but it's a key question, and it's a stupid, but the stupidity of the question makes it brilliant. Let's just I need to clarify this for our audience. Is Disciplined Agile only for IT?
No.
Thank you. Is it more difficult if it's not IT?
I missed that, sorry.
Is it more difficult if you don't have an IT culture?
It's certainly a lot easier if you're an IT. I think you're a little more realistic about the way the world works usually, but certainly no.
The reality is, of the 2,000 practices in the toolkit, there are many that are IT focused, like maybe test-driven development or something like that. But that just means there's ingredients in the pantry you don't use. You have an allergy. You can, but there's always ways of working. There's always ways to improve your ways of working. Every initiative is like a flavor of project management or a flavor of getting work done, right? That's why it's ways of working. That's why we don't call it Disciplined Agile anymore. Well, we do, but I mean, that's just a bit of folklore, if you will. Our first edition, Disciplined Agile Delivery, subsequent books, we didn't call them. The second edition, not called Disciplined Agile. We moved.
Not Disciplined Agile Delivery.
Yeah, and we moved to ways of working as the emphasis.
But you're not doing the classical Agile thing where you just change the vocabulary to confuse everybody, right?
No.
So at Papa John's, as an example, I can talk about them because they are a case study. And they did TA in their marketing. So their marketing campaigns used to take like 6 weeks to plan, and they reduced it down to, I don't know, a week and a half or something. They used a Kanban board. They got little colorful stickies. They do their daily stand-ups. They loved it. And by the way, the byproduct of these ways of working is more joy. That's a big part of my focus these days.
That's a very humanistic principle that you put in there, which I thought was great. I think those are probably some of the hardest things in a process-driven culture to actually live up to. But I think it's good that you. But there's another underlying thing that's a real pet peeve of mine. Nothing that you say I wouldn't endorse and I wouldn't enthusiastically be behind. My concrete question to you would be, who's the conductor? And I use the word conductor intentionally. Not one of the guys who's playing the violin or the trumpet or the drum or the bass. Who's the conductor? Because the biggest problem with any form of change management, and I say Six Sigma and Lean are actually a crossover between change and process management and quality management. All of these great initiatives kind of smack in the face of classical hierarchical thinking. They don't usually have full integration in the hierarchical structure of a line organization, which exists whether or not we claim that it's dead. It's never going to be dead. It's always the underlying thing that we have to compete with. Who's the conductor? I'm going to go one step back. For Disciplined Agile, and we haven't even gotten there, we won't be able to get there, but I think we feel it a little bit, is a wonderful large compendium of principles, tools, frameworks that can revolutionize your organization. Let's put that as a cliffhanger out there. But it has an incredible depth. Who is the depth owner? Who's the conductor? Who's the one who knows that who can facilitate, maybe is the better word. It's I don't think it's classical leadership in the sense that one person says, we're not going to use Scrum anymore. But who's the one who understands the big picture and facilitates and pulls the strings in the background so that Disciplined Agile can evolve the way it's intended to? That question make any sense?
I think it depends on your scope. So if your scope is a team, then I would argue it's the team lead or some sort of a coach, prodding everybody. But if it's an organization, then I would say if you have COP, communities of practice, communities of excellence, they're supporting revolutionary.
Are you a big fan of the whole guild, tribe, squad concept?
Sure. It's great terminology. It's new terms on old concepts like OEs and COPs, and we talk about that in DA, right? Like, so we tried to have agnostic terminology as much as possible, which is why we use terms like iteration rather than sprint, because sprint puts you in a Scrum mindset instantaneously. We use some of the older terms like communities of practice and communities of excellence rather than tribes and guilds and whatever else, right? So
which most people don't understand anyways, but.
No, well, yeah. And do they understand COPs? I don't know either, but so fair enough. But but we were clear, right? It's like, if you want to call it, want to call your COPs guilds, great, have at it, right? Who cares? Use the terminology that makes the most sense for you, and be prepared to evolve it when your situation changes. But I think but you really do so. This is one of the things in DA. Is that those mechanisms were explicit, right? So we had with these, if you look at the big diagram, there's hexes, right? Which we call process blades. So there was a transformation process blade, which brought up different ways, which described different options for doing these transformations and adoptions, and brings in concepts like COPs and COEs and many other things. There's a strategy process blade as well, which is more about the overall strategy of the organization rather than just like a transformation or evolution type of thing. But it's still important. So there's many aspects. So if you look at the big process overview diagram, there's many aspects of the organization that have little to do with software development. Now, they're obviously marketing is, there's a marketing process blade. It's obviously supported by software, and it's supported by the overall IT infrastructure, but it's certainly not software focused in any way, unless you're a software firm. But so I think there's some very explicit aspects of DA which are just blatantly not software. There's the foundation layer along the bottom of the, think about the diagram now. Along the bottom,
there's a great graphic in the book that doesn't explain 100%, but from a visual perspective, kind of gives you overview of the scope. It's right at the beginning of the book. It's on page 11. Can kind of hold that into the camera. This kind of
and that's the very diagram I'm talking.
Mind map, structural I don't know, cheat sheet to kind of see the moving parts.
Yeah, and we push you to the the PMI site for great gory details behind the diagram. Yeah. And if you go to the site, you can click on or at least I don't.
Actually, that's what Joshua started unfolding all his not Miro, his mural mind maps. So we're gonna deep dive on that when I talk to him.
So you can click on the hexes, and then that will take you to the.
It kind of breaks that. But let me get back to the question, because I think I'll be letting you off easy. You gave me a fair answer, but it didn't quite answer my emotional need. Mark, did you want to take a shot at it? My question was, who owns it? Because to use one of my favorite, I originally, when I went to college, I was pre-med, then I was political science, and then I eventually went to business. And one of my favorite words I learned in history and in political science was the term realpolitik, right? There's a way that we think the world works, and that's idealistic and great, and then there's some real factors that we have to contend with. And I think one of the greatest marketable weaknesses of a great idea like Disciplined Agile or anything, lean, PMO, is you need real leaders that often have to lead without formal authority, but that makes it even more challenging. Who are these icons? Because you said your answer, Scott, was, well, from a grassroots perspective, it could be whoever's facilitating your team, but from an organizational perspective, let me throw a suggestion. Is it a value management office, or go ahead, Mark.
It's kind of like that. So maybe it would be helpful to explain the kind of ways we have worked with organizations. So we go in kind of like an executive consultant.
But executives are not going to do the work.
No, I know. But this is how we get the gig, is we come in and we say, we're going to help you move to more agile organization. But by the way, we're going to need your support. It's probably going to mean that you need to change your PMOs, how you do governance, how you do funding, how you staff your teams. And so we're that person to come in. And by the way, pitch for it's, unfortunately, PMI doesn't market it, but we wrote I think a very good executive guide, very short read that explains this process. And so we got a number of tools in the toolkit as a transformation coach. And one of them is called Moving From, Moving To. Think of 2 columns. And then we help move the executives through decisions about, okay, I know we're here right now, but as an organization, we need to move from here to here.
I'm going to be rude, Mark. I love what you're saying, but I really want our audience to hear 100% what you're saying. So is it okay if we rewind a little bit, and we'll start off with my original question, who's going to lead, and maybe we can combine it, because I think what you're saying is kind of a roadmap. Right? You're talking about kids. One of the questions I really want to entertain, and I think you're perfect for this, is in your consulting work, when you're trying to implement a disciplined agile mindset or structure or framework within an organization, what does an organization have to do, and how do you help them? What's kind of the process there? Because I think you'll answer the question, who leads in that process.
Yes. So this.
So what's step number one? I'm sorry. I really want to, for our listeners, they sometimes just want to kiss.
Okay. Well,
I know that
you're not going to be successful in the large unless you have executive support.
Yeah. And the key message is you start at the top, because that's where the power is, and you have to get some form of acknowledgement and mandate to make a system change.
You don't have to start at the top, but it's a lot easier. Like some people will start bottom up, and then they hit a ceiling, right?
Yeah.
Bottom up only gets you so far.
You can do some grassroots stuff, but if you really want to change the organization, you have to.
You need money, and it's a multi-year effort. So Mark mentioned our executive guide to DA book. A lot of that information got captured in the Transformation Blade. Online on PMI.org. So, once again, if you click on, if you go to that diagram you showed in the book, you click on transformation, then takes you to the great routine. So
those resources are available to anybody who wants to kind of deep dive on them.
Yeah, it's all available free of charge at PMI.org. And something Mark talked about is actually well documented on the site.
But I'm guessing step 2 or 3, besides getting a mandate from upper management, is to get recruit some players, right?
Yeah. So in the transformation blade, there also is a roadmap, which is context sensitive as well. And because different situations require different transformation strategies, right? So one of the things about DA is it's a bit of a fractal in this level of it's fractalish in this level of thinking, right? Because the answer to the question is always it depends, and then we go, well, it depends on this, and so the transformation strategy, the roadmap, is actually gives you multiple paths to get to the end goal, because everybody, and you mentioned earlier, KISS, everybody wants, just tell me the route to get from point A to point B. Right?
I want to think,
Once again, I'm going to use the word stupid. That is just stupid, right? Because when you look at it, because that's not a roadmap, that's a trail guide, that's a trail, right? A real roadmap, in reality, has many, many different ways to get, almost always, to get from point A to point B, right? So when I want to get from my cottage to my house, or vice versa, there's some roads that I'm just committed to, because to get out of the cottage, you got to go on. There's only two ways to do it. But once I'm on the highway, I could, go straight shot to get home. I could, go off into a wild adventure, go antique shopping or whatever. Right? So there's, many thousands of different paths that I could take to get home. Well, the same thing for transformation, right? So there's a real roadmap, gives you multiple options, and you want to take the best options for you. Like, do I want to get home fast? Boom, I'm taking this way. If I want to go antique shopping, I'm going to go like this. If there's an accident in the road, I'm going to do whatever Waze tells me to do. So that's the thing, right? So in the transformation blade online, free of charge, is this logic, which basically pretty much came out of the executive.
Yeah. So
Mark, here, before you say, don't forget what you're going to say, Mark. Just one thing. Can you guys pull the curtain real quick? Because I've got
you're being blinded.
I don't, but I look kind of.
Yeah, I know there's this weird light on your face, but that's okay.
The big one, that one, yeah. That's more. There we go. Okay.
So part of what's
thanks. I don't need too much of a halo. Yeah. Sorry, Mark. Go ahead.
First, what Scott is saying is, part of the context is, what is the scope of the engagement? So, and we've worked with dozens of clients over the years, and some big, some small, and sometimes the person who brings us in is a director of a program or a set of projects, doesn't have the scope to affect the PMO or the budget or the political pull. So now, it's a different kind of engagement. Now we're talking about optimizing individual teams to be successful within the restrictions, which are often non-agile restrictions, but you got to make it work, right?
Yeah.
Other times I get carte blanche, and you go into Papa John's and he says, we'll fix our finance, we'll fix our HR, we'll fix our marketing and our IT.
How did you get, Papa John's is not a small organization by any means.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
How long did it take for you to get that kind of endorsement from upper management?
Well, it didn't take me any time at all, because the CIO brought me in from having done the very same thing at Panera. So,
it was kind of a legacy deal.
Yeah.
Classic new executive move.
Yeah. And it wasn't.
Should I ask you how long it took you at Panera?
Well, it took, it's a couple year journey, to be honest, part-time. I'm going like 4 days a week, every couple of weeks kind of a thing. And by the way, so we just glossed over center of excellence and community of practice. A lot of people don't understand the difference. It's kind of critical. So you said who owns it? Who has the deep knowledge? One of my jobs is to do the mind meld with a representative in the PMO, which is what it usually is, but it's a DA center of excellence, to really teach them what those 2,000 things are, so they have deep knowledge. And then
which is a form of continuous learning as well, because in the community of practice, you probably revisit segments and then deep dive and exchange experiences.
Right. And of course, my job is to work my way out of a job. So I need to do that.
I love that. I love that. As a consultant, I endorse that 100%.
Right. So then we would treat the transformation as a little Kanban project, and every day we'd have a stand up and decide which teams needed our help today. And they would shadow me, and I would coach the coaches, coach the scrum masters or whatever, help them in their retrospectives, and restructure teams and move, help them pick a life cycle. Oh, by the way, so that's center of excellence, right? So excellence means you get it, you understand what the A is.
That's where your coaching is.
You understand what minimal governance is. You help them with the governance, and sort of say, this is the way. This is a governance that makes sense for Papa John. So this is what we're going to do: minimal yet sufficient. And then community practice is, well, you might have a requirements community practice, a test-driven development community practice. And their job is to learn a piece of the toolkit that's relevant to their domain and work together, saying what's working for us between different teams and improve that way.
And learn together.
Right. Those are your methods of continuous learning, which is so important.
Yeah.
Whole thing.
And that doesn't require a matrix organization, right? Like if you remember, like the 80s and 90s, and the matrix organizations were developed for that specific thing, right? You'd get a testing person, and they'd be reporting to the project manager for the extent of this project, but they'd also be reporting to the testing manager, right? And then getting direction from both, and then be confusing. And very, very stressful.
I'm gonna ask a typical simple-minded, evil management question, because I got an MBA. I'm allowed to. How long did the process take at Panera Bread? How long did it take at Papa John's?
They're both about a couple of years, maybe a little faster. A couple 2 years ish.
Yeah,
and it's done
for both.
You leave. Yeah, well, it was a little faster at Papa John's because I didn't have to.
Yeah, I'm trying to set the ball so you can smash it, so that somebody who books you can say, yeah, I want the Papa John package, not the Panera.
Yeah. Well, the guy behind it, probably one of the best executives I've ever worked on in my entire career.
Give him a shout out.
Mike Nettles.
Yeah. Mike Nettles.
Yeah, he's in the restaurant industry, but he gets it. And so the first one, he kind of trusted Scott.
Now, is Mike Nettles the CIO you were talking about, or?
Yeah, he's been CIO for a number of companies. In fact, at Papa John's, he was actually COO for a period.
Okay, cool.
More out of IT and that helps you understand the value that Papa John saw in the work that he was doing. He's like, we need to make this an organizational thing, not just an IT thing.
Which is a brilliant statement, but makes it in the implementation all the more daunting because there's so many moving parts. Let me ask you a question. Maybe I misunderstood, but I think you kind of allude to it in your I think it's chapter 5, where you talk about the concept of the levels of process goals. Is that what you're referring to also? Kind of you got to know from the vision to the mission all the way down to the operational. There's layers. Is that what the focus of that is, right?
Yeah, so the process goal diagrams are summarize the choices, and they're basically a decision tree. If you're familiar with decision trees, so the way you read the diagram is, so when we're exploring requirements, then there's a bunch of issues we need to consider, right? Like, how are we going to prioritize the work? Who's going to identify the work? How are we going to document and a bunch of other things, right? And for each one of those things, so like could be 6 or 7 different ways to prioritize requirements, not just having a product owner. That's one of 7, right? So this is where the prescriptive methods like Scrum start to fall down, right? They tell you one way of doing things. There's multiple ways that we can capture requirements. There's multiple ways that we can explore requirements. There's multiple techniques. There's different ways to capture usage requirements, not just user stories. There's different ways that we could capture business processes, not just UML activity diagrams.
Non-functionals.
Like non-functional requirements. Yeah, a whole boatload of stuff. So then to be fair, it becomes overwhelming, right? Because you get like these predictive methods or prescriptive methods that are telling you one official way of doing things. So you get the one recipe for mac and cheese. And then here we're the joy of cooking, and we're saying you need to make some choices here. And sometimes some choices are better than others. Sometimes it's just make the right choice for you, right? And it's the equivalent of like going to this, somebody tells you, well, throw some spice in the mac and cheese, and you go to your spice cabinet and you've got like 50 different spices there. What do you do?
Yeah.
Right? I don't know what saffron tastes like. Is it really a good idea to throw saffron into mac and cheese?
Yeah.
Gonna find out the hard way. you know,
fail fast.
Yeah. So you ruin a meal, right? Like this would be this is gets back to the agile thing here. Well, let's just try saffron and mac and cheese and see what happens. No, you know what? Maybe I should talk to somebody who's tried this before. Saffron and mac and cheese? Are you kidding? That's like $50 worth of spice you're about to waste on a 5-year-old.
Important to point out that you don't have to make that mistake, because we put it works in this situation. So saffron not good in mac and cheese. Saffron good in pasta or something else. I don't know. But we actually we don't just list the choices. We explain what they are. So in many cases, if not most,
you wouldn't refer to it as prescriptive, but actually it is. There are paths in your development, but it's like you have multiple options, left, right, middle, and you kind of work your way through it.
Well, no, yes and no, but we say don't go left in this situation. If you're like this, your better path is to go right. We say that.
Yeah.
So your chances of failing are reduced because you're not making decisions. Say, let's try saffron and mac and cheese. No, because don't put it with mac. It's a bad combination.
It's poison. Saffron and dairy mix into poison.
So you're not making choices in a vacuum. Yeah, in particular, like user stories or not story mapping. Like we don't tell you how to do story mapping. We couldn't, but we say go buy Jeff Patton's book on it if you're really interested in this technique. But in general, it's really good in these situations. So you go, oh, brilliant! I'm going to try that this sprint, and I better go order Jeff's book to learn.
Let me ask you another typical management question that viewers might be asking him. If I'm a CEO, I said, okay, I'd be interested in, if you say Mike Nettles is so successful and I want to be like Mike Nettles, of course you've already said it kind of depends on the size of the organization and how complex the context. What time frame would I have to, as an executive, have to invest to get to a major milestone in Disciplined Agile? You're talking about 1-2 years?
You definitely see results like in a matter of a couple of months.
So I mean, from an operational perspective, you would see it immediately in individual projects, but from a systemic perspective, you'd have to invest more time until it becomes part of the culture, right?
And you'll often see fairly good behaviors in some of your teams already. It's just, are you able to recognize that they are making choices? Are you able to get out of their way? Are you able to support them? Better yet, support them and enable them. And also sometimes too, are you there guiding them? Are you being a good parent?
Well, that goes back to you need that facilitator, that caretaker. If you don't have that caretaker, if you don't have the conductor, let me ask you another question. I've kind of assumed based on what you were saying, or based maybe out of my context, because at the moment I'm doing a lot in the direction of maturity modeling, because I'm trying to cut through the BS there and find simple ways of assessing things quickly. I'm assuming that for DA consultants or facilitators, there are analysis tools available, kind of a good practice on how, when I come into a new organization, where do I start? What are some of the roadmap milestones that I might go through? Is that correct? Do you have a maturity model or an assessment because you have DA? Also, I think there's a certification for DA, Master of the Universe.
Yeah. So there was and there wasn't. So as a consulting organization, yes, and we would often start with an assessment for a couple of reasons. First, just selfishly, we need to figure out where they are and what their problems are, but also they needed help prioritizing what they should, where they should focus their energies. But also part of the DA toolkit is arguably a maturity model. So some of the choices have like in the process diagram you were talking about earlier, some of the choices have an arrow beside them. So you get this list of 7 choices for here's how you can prioritize requirements. When there's an arrow beside that, that's an indication that the strategies towards the top of the list are generally better than the strategies towards the bottom of the list. Like, your mileage may vary, but in general, this is going to prove to be the case. Sometimes there's no arrow because we just couldn't say strategy A is better than strategy B. So in the case of the arrows, that's effectively a mini maturity model. And so if you're familiar with CMMI, they talk about there's two versions of CMI: the staged, which everybody went for because they want to get their little gold star. Ooh, we're CMI level 3. Ooh, gold star. But the organizations that were interested in improvement did the continuous version of CMMI, where you focused on the various aspects of what I needed to improve. And I didn't really care. I want to get level 5 at requirements prioritization. I could care less about my little gold star that
the quantitative approach is cute, but it doesn't really necessarily serve your purpose. And the other thing that we would want to
your purpose should be to
it's not static. Pardon me?
Well, the purpose should be to improve, right? So I do want to move up the food chain to the most appropriate level for my for my team or my organization in requirements prioritization. It might not be the best level, but it might be like 3 levels. But that's good enough.
From a cost benefit perspective, it might be the right way. And the other thing I think most people just forget is quality is a journey, not a destination. So
exactly, yeah.
So something I think we should really point out at this point, Mark, is that what we've been talking about is what Scott and Mark used to do pre-PMI. I think it's fair to acknowledge. So Scott is saying that a lot of that now is being sort of institutionalized into the website, Transformation Blade, get more information there. But what we have not talked about is the fact that Al Shalloway brought additional value into this exercise when he joined PMI, because he takes it to a higher level in many ways, and really looks at the overall value stream, not about just delivering solutions, but end-to-end enterprise value, leading up the enterprise, those kinds of things. And so his content was kind of merged with ours. And when you talk with Joshua Barnes, he will tell you, because he's working very closely with PMI right now, about what's next for DA or DA next.
And that was what I wanted. I wanted to have the OGs introduce Disciplined Agile to the population, and then I'll work out what PMI is.
So when you talk to him, I don't know if it's out yet, and I don't know if it's public. I don't think it's an issue to tell you that PMI recognizes sort of a market that they have missed is educating executives and transformations. And project managers have dreamed of, as Scott said earlier, of being at the table, a seat at the table. There's a great book out there about this. And how do they, being a manager of large initiatives, being successful at it, but it's different to say, I'm also a visionary and I can change the organization, just deliver value for projects. And the new value management offering coming from PMI, I believe, addresses that market. And it's a stepping stone for project managers to go to what's next. So look into that.
That's a great segue. Let's talk about, you guys were the originators from Disciplined Agile. Where along the way did PMI come into the picture, and tell us a little bit about that recent, not too long ago history, and where PMI is with Disciplined Agile right now.
Oh, gotta keep it short. But acquisition was 6 years ago. Scott and I stuck around for 3 years before we left, on amicable terms, by the way. No rumors there.
Yeah, and it wasn't, we didn't leave because our 3-year limit had occurred.
Nothing to do.
No, we weren't. We were golden handcuffed in, of course, but we could have left on day one if we didn't, obviously.
No, it was just time for us to do something different. But there was not just to set any rumors straight. There was no agenda, nothing financial, nothing about.
No, I don't even know any rumors. I think the general sentiment was from a lot of the people that I talked to, they were seriously concerned what that meant for Disciplined Agile, because you guys have a great reputation.
There's a lady who used to work for me who's now the product manager, Christy Muller. I still have regular calls. I just talked to her last week. So we're constant. She keeps me abreast of what's going on, and she asked me for advice about where this should go next. So we're still there.
I think this is exemplified also by you sharing the names of the new product managers and people that are involved. My conversation with Joshua, who was very gregarious and very open, and I sent him your regards, and he was very complimentary of you guys. But I also noticed, and I want to mention this because one of the things that I do in my consulting work, I do some nonprofit consulting for an organization that's in the charitable field, and one of the things in the life cycle of developing a new organization is how do you create something that's sustainable after you leave, right? And I think a lot of people who create concepts tie the product that they generate so strongly to themselves as a person. If you're talking about 7 Habits and Stephen Covey, or I'm using a weird example there. The danger of that process is that when that person dies, a good, valuable concept can float downriver as well and be forgotten because people are so associate the product with individuals. And I think, this is my impression. I think there's nothing wrong with. First of all, hats off to creating such a great product. I think it also shows a sign of greatness that you're willing to share it with the world and let it go a little bit, and let other people work on it. I think that shows more greatness than it does neglect in any form or fashion. So,
thank you.
Like I said, I'll grill Joshua. I think one of the key things, beside a lot of the details that Joshua and we had a preliminary call after we talked originally. I think the one strategy I really want to kind of delve into with him, he mentioned that there's a new strategy from PMI, and part of the strategy is to kind of go away from the B2C to the B2B, which for an MBA, we love bullshit words like B2B and B2C. Nobody knows what the hell it means, but it sounds good. It's like top down and bottom up. You use that whenever in doubt. Now, I'm not going to discount what he's saying. I'm sure there's value to it, but I don't mean it's BS in the sense that the words are BS. But if you don't understand what that means, it's BS. And that's why I really look forward to really understanding what does PMI mean with a stronger focus on B2B. Does it refer to what you were talking about, working more with CEOs, or does that mean working with consultancy firms, or does it mean that PMI is going to create a pool of experts that work together with organizations? What does that concretely mean? Is interesting. And I'm also going to kind of question him in a constructive sort of way. There's a lot of certifications out there. Some of them are still live, I think. A couple of them are still live. A couple of them are in hold. What's going to happen with that? I heard that everybody who has certification gets to keep their certification in posterity. But
you don't take.
It's for me. It's interesting. I kind of see myself as an informer of the community as best I can and a promoter of good things, and that's why I ask questions like this.
So, Mark, do you mind do you want me to clarify a little bit about why they're moving from B2C to B2B? Or
I'd love to. Yeah, go ahead.
For people who don't know the acronyms, not too long ago, I didn't know them either. B2C, which has always been sort of PMI's strategy, which would be to sell certifications to individual practitioners and basically ignore management. So enable a bunch of project managers as PMPs, and that was their ticket. Well, it didn't work with DA because management had no idea what DA was. So you're getting all these people certified in Disciplined Agile and not getting any institutional traction, organizational traction, because management had no clue. Why? And I think it took a while for PMI to ask, why was DA successful prior to PMI and it didn't take off once we were in PMI? Well, it's because we were marketing to B2C. Our success, Mark, came from talking to executives, the Mike Nettles of the world, and
PMO leads as well. PMOs.
Executives are smart people, right? They get context.
Did you guys have certification before PMI?
Yeah.
Okay. We made DA certification, if that's what you mean.
Yeah.
The certification. Absolutely. Yeah. But it was fairly simple. We went into troubled organizations, right? And they were desperate for answers. They tried SAFe, they tried Scrum, not successful.
So, but sorry to interrupt you, just for the sake of understanding, are you saying that your focus was not so much on the certification? The certification was kind of probably a byproduct. Your actual focus was to facilitate change within an organization, and that's what the B2B means.
So first of all, we did not want a certification program because we were so cynical about the existing programs out there that make you a master after 2 days of training.
And they all crash.
I'm offended that you question my multiple certifications. No, I'm not.
Well, but we kind of caved because people said, "I'm going to your course, Mark. I want a certificate."
Yeah.
And employers said, we're going DA. How do I know I can find people who actually know this thing? So we kind of got pushed into and developed certifications.
I think certifications have this value, but people can misuse the purpose of it.
Yeah. So the top-down B2B, where now the B2B is a consulting organization like a Deloitte or whatever, going into the executive company like GE, selling them on the thing, and the GE goes, "Okay, go for it," and then boom, right? Six Sigma across GE, whatever.
Yeah, I think Six Sigma is a good example because they have certification as well. But the black belt, blue belt, yellow belt was actually part of the overall system. And you didn't buy, I mean, you could buy the certification, but it didn't help you unless the organization had bought into the Six Sigma.
Yes. Yes. So very simple idea. So so that's how we were successful, because at ICBC, it's an insurance company in British Columbia. The executive buys into it, CIO, and I say, "Okay, first thing, we got to train 300 people." And we did. So boom, you got 300 practitioners all of a sudden. Same thing with Papa John's, Panera, and all our other clients.
But the original contract was with Panera Bread. It was with Papa John. It wasn't, "Hey, I'm Joe Smith and I want to get certified according to Disciplined Agile because I'm an idealist and it makes me feel good. But once I go into my company with this certification,"
we do a very small amount of B2C, right? We'd run the occasional public course, but 5% maybe 10. Go with 10. Like not a lot to worry. Like around.
Do you know, is PMI going to, in the B2B approach, or are they going to be accrediting, or whatever the term might be, so I don't use the word certification, consultancy firms, or is PMI going to try to do some of the consultancy itself?
I don't want to make any. We're not in a position.
I can ask dangerous questions.
So we could make suggestions, but we can't make any promises. But I would.
It's hard
to do that.
I used to be the VP of DA at PMI, right? I was responsible for the brand, and so I had these conversations with the board and with the executive leadership team. Part of the issue is they're not for profit. They're not in the business of doing consulting. So
I think it would be a lot less sticky if they would do a more inclusive. I think that's one of the things that made PMI so strong. If you compare it to IPMA is strong as well, but not as big as PMI. Is that I mean, to the advantage of local chapters, IPMA, every chapter could make its own money. They own, they could do their own certifications. I think what really drove PMI was this inclusive. There's plenty of space at the table, and PMI's focus is to be a hub for many players, B2B, B2C, individuals, groups, organizations.
But fundamentally, for B2B, you need boots on the ground. There is absolutely nothing around that. Right? You need boots on the ground, and you need boots that know what they're doing. So they're going to need
dedication, time and dedication, resources, capabilities.
So there's got to be a business model there that's attractive to the Deloittes of the world, or to Joshua's company, like small companies, medium companies, right? The consultants have got to make some money, and because they got mortgages to pay and all that sort of stuff.
I can see PM. I can see PMI. Go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
So PMI is not able to. Because they don't consult, right? And they don't train. They train the trainers, and there's training organizations that deliver PMI content, but PMI doesn't, right? Other than the digital stuff. Same thing with consulting, right? There's got to be blessed consulting organizations that can deliver, and it's not just a DA thing, right? Like there's other things in PMI that I would say the exact same thing. Like there's you want to bring risk management up to the role. Well, there needs to be some coaching there. Like there needs to be training, obviously. There needs to be other things, but certainly there needs to be coaching and consulting. So
I do
enable consulting organizations to do that.
I do see PMI changing its model a little bit and cutting into the training sphere because technology allows it. Yeah, but I agree with you. I think the trying to do the consulting part would be a daunting thing, and it's I think they'd be smarter to use the SAP model. SAP says, you know what, we'll implement some of our own projects, but those are really handpicked. The trough is big. And many organizations out there will sell our product willingly if we allow them to do the implementation. I think that's a good strategy.
So pre-PMI, we support, like we had partner consulting organizations that we supported, right? So if you were a DA consulting, or like not ours, but another DA consulting organization, then they could bring us in to do an executive workshop or do some training or do just some marketing stuff to enable them to then put their own boots on the ground and run with a multi-year effort, right? So I could see PMI doing something like that, where they've got a cadre of like a small internal group that consults to the consultants.
Yeah.
Like a COE.
I think the PMI is also gotten better in accepting the fact that people love organizations because of people and not because of organizations. Okay, the whole fact that, for example, Lee Lambert, who I'm sure you're familiar with, I had him on one of my podcasts. The fact that he's a rabid, wonderful cheerleader for PMI, and that PMI gives him spotlight and air to breathe. I think that's that's what make the personal touch. If you know somebody, if people know you, then they have a different feeling towards Disciplined Agile. And actually, I hope
if there's any chapter presidents or members watching this right now, I highly suggest bringing Lee in as a speaker if you can get a hold of him.
I've already had Lee on here. I've already pitched him. For those chapter presidents who are looking for great speakers, are you two guys available?
Yeah, we are. And Joshua, let's give a shout out to Joshua. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Good. So. A couple of months ago, University of Maryland flew me out to be their opening keynote. And, I gave them a very good deal, put it that way, because I kind of consider it a way of give back. So I love to speak and love to share. As you can tell, we're quite passionate about this.
Yeah. and absolutely.
The joy it gives us to see people starting to laugh again in the trenches rather than fight and bicker and be miserable. You spend so much time in the office of your life. You deserve to be happy. And I can say with it, complete honesty that every single time Scott and I leave an organization, everybody is happier. The executives are happier.
Sounds bad, but
the customer,
they're gone.
I think I worded that. No, but what comes to mind, the term that comes to mind is the concept of a humane system, right? I mean, a system is there to have output and outcomes and quantitative, schmontitative, but at the end of the day, it's run by human beings, and human beings have needs and wants, and if you can accommodate both, I think you have synergy. Let's use that as a segue. What are you two up to now that you've relieved yourself of some of your responsibility, and you're no longer at PMI having to carry the brunt of that? What are projects? What are you working on? For those people who are listening and say, hey, I want to get a hold of these guys, we'll put your linked information on LinkedIn. What are things that you're working on that you want the rest of the community to know?
Sure. So I'll start. My only pitch I would make is these days. So out of the blue, Mike Nettles wrote me a reference on LinkedIn. I didn't ask for it, and it almost brought me to tears. It's like it made my whole career worthwhile, because I told you how much respect I have for this man. So read that referral. That's all I need to say about me. So after we were acquired by PMI, I learned to fly, which was lifelong dream. So I became a pilot, and that's pretty
Awesome.
cool. I got time now to do more reading and a bit of golf, a bit of curling. If you're not from Canada, maybe you don't know what that is.
Yeah,
Look it
I'm
up.
familiar with curling.
Yeah. So and then I'm doing some volunteer work as well within the Calgary community. I'm available if the right gig came along, part-time. I'm not interested in a full-time engagement at this point in my career, and I'm available for speaking engagements.
So speaking, mentoring, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Excellent. Scott?
So when I left PMI, I tried to follow my own advice. So for years, I always told people, when you're making a major career change, if you can afford it, take 6 months off and try to figure out, what you want to be when you grow up. So I tried that. And so after a few months, I got bored out of my skull. But so I decided to go back to school and get another master's. So I went back to school for a master's in AI. And I made that decision about a month before GPT 3.5 got released, right? So it's like I was all excited, learn some really cool stuff, and get updates and things I'd been doing in the 90s, and it's all like I've got a deep data background, so it's all about data. But so then GPT 3.5 came out, and everybody went nuts, right? And we're still sort of in that nutso phase, like all the hype cycle stuff. And it's like, oh, I don't want to go through another hype cycle, right? I've been there, done that too many times. Not really interested. So anyway, so I did the master's. I just graduated a while ago, and I'm working on a book on continuous data pipeline. So basically applying Disciplined Agile in the data space, which I've done many times, but finally decided to write an updated book about it. And so I'm working on that. That's hopefully going to come out early 2026, and delivering some workshops on that topic as well, and doing a little bit of consulting, mostly around applying DA strategies in the data quality space, because most organizations are really struggling and need to get out of the traditional mode is the easiest, and need to fix the problem, need to do the work. That's the unfortunate part of the message.
Well, we'll definitely put your whatever contact information you're willing and wanting to share in the below. We have a tradition also in the podcast. I always look at Rico and Nelly at about this time. By the way, I think, have we broken a record yet? Yeah, Nelly's giving me the dirty eye now. They're still awake, so that's a good sign. I think I might have had more fun than they, because this is what I eat and breathe. I use them as my test group, though. You probably understand that, because they have they're creatives, and they have lots of creative project experience, but it's kind of very very agile. But what I also do is I kind of give them the opportunity to ask questions. Do you have questions? Hold on, now you come. You don't have an excuse now. Over here. I need the audience to see that these people actually exist. So this is Nelly.
Hi. So the question is, apart from IT, are there any kind of companies where you would say Agile works best or doesn't work at all? What are the circumstances where it works best and where it doesn't really go down to the marrow?
Okay.
Apart from it.
Well, so Agile in general works best when you need, particularly in creative organizations. Fundamentally, I think creative stuff like, graphics work, music work, writing work is fundamentally iterative in nature and Agile, and has to be very collaborative and stuff like that. So
I think a lot of it's intuitive though, because they don't take the predictive methodology because it's just so far away from the reality.
Yeah, exactly. And you need to be, particularly when you need to be experimental, right? You've talked about product development a lot. And it doesn't have to be a software-based product. It could be physical products and or combinations thereof. So I think anywhere where you need to experiment and where you just don't know what your end users or your customers want, then you need to work in an agile manner. So that's most situations. It really is, and it gets down to
your answer is that you can use a semblance of agile in every situation.
Pretty much, yeah. Well, there hasn't. I've never run into a situation where we couldn't help them get better through some application of Agile or Lean, or combinations thereof.
I think Agile is just that is more. I think Agile is more in tune with the dynamic nature, with the openness of possibilities. And if you try to frame everything, you're creating a rigid framework that doesn't allow you to maximize opportunities. Yeah.
And it's interesting. So years ago, I worked for IBM, and I had the privilege of interacting with the leader of one of the Mars landers. I can't remember which one it was, but that was so. I went in thinking, well, that's got to be highly predictive because it's all science and physics and math and stuff like that. And no, it was very agile. And they actually, that project, which was successful, they actually started with a traditional approach because they believed it was physics, and obviously physics and math are important there. But they had this interesting problem that they had to hit a planet 200 million miles away with a probe that was the size and weight of a Volkswagen, and they had to get it into orbit, and then from orbit they had to slow it down enough to land gently on Mars. Like, it's not about slamming something into Mars. That's just like fire a bullet at it, right? You actually had to land. So they're running simulations and running experiments, and there's no control, right? It's like, because it's like a 20-minute time lag, speed of light type stuff. So you can't tell the probe what to do, right? You can tell, oh yeah, okay, good, you're good to try to land, and then the probe does its own thing, and then eventually it comes back with, yay, I landed successfully, or you hear nothing, and then you figure out that it's landing. That was a phenomenally. So what I would, and that was an example that I'd been using for years as, here's where I wouldn't do Agile. Because it's obviously very scientific. And then, and then I talked to the people who actually did that work, and I say, no, it was pretty agile. It was a hybrid.
Yeah, if you get into the details, the multitude of how do you solve the micro problems, I think, definitely.
Yeah, and the really interesting thing was they didn't go agile until they needed to. Like, it was, they tried the traditional way that intuition tell you should work. And then when they couldn't make it work, then they went at risk.
Yeah. Which is also kind of a form of discipline. Yeah. Great. Rico, do you have any questions? No, he's good to go. Guys, you broke the record for time. I don't care. I told you guys up front. I was thinking of giving you guys a safety word like pineapple, so that you could. But had I given it, I think one of you two would have probably said pineapple a long time ago. I hope this was as much fun for you as it was for me. Probably not, but I had a blast. I want to say thanks again so much for your time, for your wisdom, for your dedication to the craft, for your charitable contribution to the overall community of project management. I know it sounds very, very over the top, but I wouldn't say that if I didn't mean it. So thanks for everything, and I hope that this podcast will be a fair and decent representation of who you are as people.
Oh, thanks for the conversation. This was great.
It's been a nice trip down memory lane.
Yeah.
Well, I hope we get to meet sometime in person.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. And I'll definitely reach out. I might hit you up and see if Mike Nettles is willing to share some of his experiences about Disciplined Agile, so that we get a practitioner. I think that might open up some more ears and eyes.
Yeah, he absolutely will.
I'm sure. For sure.
Okay. Guys, thank you so very, very much.
Our pleasure.
Take care.
Thanks. All the best.
Okay, thanks. Bye.